She was already on the first step, bags in hand, eyes straight ahead. Done. Then his voice cracked open the silence like a rifle shot across that frozen platform, raw, desperate, nothing left to protect. Please, don't go. I know what you see. But those letters, every single word, that was me. Evelyn Whitaker stopped breathing. The conductor waited. The passengers stared, and a man who had never begged for anything in his life stood trembling in a coat 2 sizes too small, asking one woman to believe in something nobody else ever had. This is that story. If this kind of love still moves you, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every word of what comes next is worth it. She snatched her travel bag off the wooden bench and spun toward the train before the steam had even finished clearing the platform. That was it. That was all Silas Wren needed to see. 7 months. 7 months of letters written by oil lamp in a cabin that had never heard another human voice after dark. 7 months of pouring out the kind of honesty a man like him had no business putting on paper, and she had looked at him for less than 30 seconds before deciding he wasn't worth her time. He didn't blame her. That was the worst part. He had known, somewhere deep in his chest where he kept all the things he never said aloud, that this moment might come. He had told himself he was prepared for it. He had stood at that mirror in the general store 3 days ago, the only proper mirror in Cedar Hollow, and looked at himself the way a stranger would look at him. The scar, the size of him, the roughness that 17 years in the mountains carved into every part of his face and his hands, and the way he stood like he was bracing for a storm that never quite stopped coming. He had told himself he was ready for her to walk away. He was not ready. Ma'am, the word came out cracked. Low, barely louder than the hiss of the engine dying behind him. Evelyn Whitaker slowed but did not stop. Ma'am, please. She stopped, not because she wanted to. He could tell that much. She stopped the way a person stops when something in the air changes, when something lands differently than expected, and the body reacts before the mind has time to argue. Her shoulders were still pulled in tight. Her fingers were white around the leather handle of her bag. She did not turn around, but she stopped. Silas took 1 step forward. Just one. He didn't want to frighten her any worse than he already had. I know what you see, he said. I'm not blind to it. I never have been. A few people on the platform had gone quiet. Old Hector Drummond, who ran the dry goods store, was pretending to study something in the direction of the water tower. Margaret Fines, the postmaster's wife, was absolutely not pretending to look away at all. She was staring openly, the way people in small towns always did, when something happened that would be talked about for the next 20 years. Silas paid none of them any mind, those letters, he said. Every word in them was true. I need you to know that. I didn't write them to fool you, or to make myself into something I'm not. I wrote them because they were the truest things I'd ever put down. Evelyn's grip on the bag loosened slightly. She still did not turn. The man you read about, Silas continued, the one who watched the sunrise over the eastern ridge and thought it looked like God had cracked open a lantern behind the mountains, that was me. The man who told you about the elk calf he found half frozen in the creek bed last February and carried 2 miles back to the barn, that was me too. A pause. The train engine gave a long, low groan. I know I don't look like any of it. She turned around. He had not expected that. He had been preparing himself to keep talking to the back of her head until either she walked away or the train left without her. He had not prepared for her to actually turn and look at him. Evelyn Whitaker was smaller than he had imagined. He knew that was a foolish thing to notice in this moment, but it struck him anyway. In his mind, built from months of her letters, precise, careful letters that never wasted a word, he had pictured someone tall, composed, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately understood exactly where everything was and why. She was composed, that part was true. But she was small, and her eyes were darker than he expected, and right now those eyes were doing what everyone else's eyes did when they landed on him for the first time. They were working very hard not to show fear. You're Silas Wren, she said. It was not a question. It was more like something she was saying out loud in order to make herself accept it. Yes, ma'am, you wrote me 31 letters. 32, he said. The last one I sent 2 weeks ago. I don't know if it reached you before you left. Something flickered across her face. It did. The conductor appeared at the top of the train steps. Miss, we're pulling out in 4 minutes. Evelyn looked at the conductor. She looked at her bag. She looked at Silas. Just give me a chance, Silas said quietly. That's all I'm asking. Not forever, not a promise. Just give me the chance to show you that the man in those letters and the man standing in front of you are the same person. You should have told me, she said. There was something in her voice, not cruelty, but something tight and bruised. In the letters. You should have described yourself more clearly. I did, he said. She frowned. Third letter, he said. I told you I was large. I told you I had a scar across my left cheek from a rock slide 6 years back. I told you I'd spent so many winters alone in the mountains that I'd forgotten how to make proper conversation with people who weren't trees or horses. He paused. I thought I was being honest. You didn't tell me you were... She stopped herself. Frightening? He said the word carefully, without heat. No, I suppose I didn't use that word. She looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved between them. The train engine groaned again, lower this time, like it was settling. You're asking me to trust you, she said. Yes, ma'am. Based on 32 letters and 4 minutes on a train platform. Yes, ma'am. That's not a great deal to work with. No, he agreed, it isn't. Another long pause. She shifted the bag from her right hand to her left. If I stay, she said slowly, and I'm not saying I am, but if I stay. What exactly are you proposing? Nothing you haven't already agreed to, he said. Room at the Widow Hale's boarding house in town. Separate, proper arrangements. You meet the community. You see the valley. You give me 2 weeks to show you who I am in person, the same way I showed you in writing. And then you make your decision. And if I decide to leave after 2 weeks, then I buy your ticket myself, and I don't say a single word to stop you. She studied his face. He let her. He had learned a long time ago that there was no point in flinching when people stared at the scar. It was there. It was part of him. Flinching had never once made it smaller. That letter 2 weeks ago, she said finally. The 32nd one. Yes? You wrote about a morning last October. You said you climbed to the top of the North Ridge before dawn, and when the sun came up, the whole valley filled with mist and it looked like the mountains were breathing. She paused. You said it was the loneliest, beautiful thing you'd ever seen. Because there was nobody to show it to. He nodded. I read that letter 4 times, she said quietly. Silas said nothing. Miss, the conductor called again. Evelyn looked at the train. Then she set her bag down on the platform. 2 weeks, she said. Silas exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. 2 weeks, he agreed. He picked up her bag before she could reach for it again. It was reflex, the same reflex that made him hold doors and steady fences and carry things that were too heavy for one person. He caught himself and started to set it back down. You don't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. I'd like to. Then she nodded, once. And that was how it began. Not with romance. Not with the kind of breathless recognition that happened in the stories women passed around back east. It began with a woman putting down a bag she had already picked up in order to leave, and a man who was still not entirely sure he deserved the chance she'd just given him. Cedar Hollow was not a large town. It had one main street, wide enough for 2 wagons to pass with room to spare, lined on both sides with the kinds of businesses that kept a frontier settlement alive: the dry goods store, the livery, the post office, a small bank with a new coat of paint that hadn't weathered yet, a saloon that was quieter on Sundays, and the Widow Hale's boarding house at the far eastern end, a 2-story building with clean curtains and a porch that caught the afternoon light. Silas walked Evelyn there himself. He was aware, acutely and uncomfortably, of every pair of eyes that tracked their progress down the main street. Cedar Hollow did not get many visitors from the east. A woman arriving alone, well-dressed by frontier standards. Stepping along the boardwalk beside the mountain man, who almost never came down from his ridge except for supplies. That was the kind of thing that stopped conversations and started new ones. Do they always stare like this? Evelyn asked, her voice low and even. At me? Always, Silas said. At you it's new. Give it a week and you'll be familiar enough they'll mostly ignore you. Unless something more interesting happens, which it sometimes does. What counts as interesting around here? Last year, a grizzly got into the Hennessy flower supply. Year before that, a man came through claiming he'd found silver up near the North Pass. Turned out to be quartz. He left before anyone could ask too many questions about it. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something close to it. And before that, she asked. Before that, a man came into town with a wolf on a rope and tried to sell it to Drummond as a guard dog. Silas paused. That didn't end well for anyone involved. She did smile this time. Small and careful, like she was testing it out. And where do I rank in terms of interesting? High, he said honestly. Very high. She absorbed that. Because a woman came all the way from Pennsylvania to meet you. Because a woman came all the way from Pennsylvania and didn't get back on the train. She looked sideways at him. You expected me to. I thought it was likely, he said. Yes, then why did you ask me to come at all? Silas was quiet for a moment. They had reached the boarding house steps. He stopped at the bottom, and she stopped beside him, and he thought about how to say the next thing honestly without making it sound like more than it was or less than it was. Because I spent 6 years telling myself that writing to someone was foolish, he said. That no woman with a good life would choose this one. And then one night last winter, I sat down at that table with a lamp and a piece of paper, and I thought, what if I was wrong? What if I'd been talking myself out of something, before it even had a chance to exist? He looked at her. I decided I'd rather be wrong out loud than right in silence. Evelyn studied him with those dark, careful eyes. That is, she said slowly, almost exactly something you wrote in your 9th letter. I know, I meant it then too. Then the widow Hale. Is she kind, practical, he said, which in my experience is better. All right, she took her bag back from him, their fingers close but not touching. Silas, it was the first time she had used his name. He noticed. He thought she might have noticed that he noticed. Thank you, she said, for not letting me leave without saying anything. Thank you, he said, for stopping. She went inside. Silas stood at the bottom of those steps for a long moment after the door closed. He put his hat back on. He looked up at the sky, which was going the color of copper at the ashes, the way it did in autumn when the day was finishing itself off and the cold was coming in behind it. He had 2 weeks. He had spent 17 years alone in those mountains, believing he was the kind of man that life passed by. He had believed it so thoroughly, and for so long, that it had stopped feeling like a belief and started feeling like simply the truth of things, a fact as solid as the rock face he'd fallen against the day he got the scar. A fact as permanent as the cold that came in every October without asking permission. 2 weeks. He turned and walked back up the main street, and this time he didn't notice who was staring. He was already thinking about tomorrow. The next morning arrived clear and sharp-edged, the kind of autumn morning in the Rockies that felt like the world had been rinsed overnight and hung out in the cold to dry. Silas was down from the ridge before the sun had cleared the eastern peaks. He had been awake since before 4, which was not unusual for him. His body had learned years ago that sleep was something that happened in the gaps between necessary things, not the other way around. He had made a decision. He was not going to try to impress her. He had thought about it, turning it over through the dark hours, the way he turned over problems that didn't have obvious solutions, and he had landed on this. Impressing her was not the point. The point was to let her see what was real. The letters had been real. The life behind them had to match. So when he knocked on the widow Hale's door at 7 in the morning, he was wearing the same worn coat he wore every day. Not the borrowed one that didn't fit, his own, honest. Mrs. Hale opened the door with the expression of a woman who had already made several assessments about the situation and was keeping most of them to herself. She's at breakfast, Mrs. Hale said. I'm not here to interrupt her breakfast, Silas said. I wanted to leave something. He held out a piece of paper not folded, just a single flat page with writing on it. When she's finished eating. Mrs. Hale took it with both eyebrows raised just slightly. A letter? You drove down from the mountain to deliver a letter to a woman who is staying 40 feet from where you're standing. Yes, ma'am. She studied him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted very slightly into something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. I'll make sure she gets it. He had written it that morning, in the dark, before the lamp had really found its footing against the night. It was short. It said, "Good morning. I will be at the livery at 8:30 if you'd like to see some of the valley. You're not obligated. If you'd rather have the morning to yourself, I understand completely. There is good coffee at Drummond's store, and he won't overcharge you because he knows you're with me." S. Wren. He didn't know, walking back toward the livery, if she would come. She came. She was 3 minutes late, which he didn't mention, and she was dressed practically a dark wool skirt, good boots, a coat that looked like it had been chosen with weather in mind rather than appearance. He approved of that, and then felt slightly foolish for having an opinion on it. "You wrote me another letter," she said by way of greeting. "Shorter than the others, and you delivered it in person." "Efficiency," he said. She looked at him. "Is that what that was?" "I'm trying it out. I'll let you know if it suits me." She almost smiled again. He was keeping count, 2 in 2 days. He recognized this as probably a ridiculous thing to keep count of and did it anyway. He had arranged for 2 horses his own, a dark bay gelding named Porter, who had the temperament of a sensible old man, and a quieter mare from the livery named Clover, who he had ridden himself several times and knew to be steady on rocky ground. "Can you ride?" he asked, not making it a challenge. "I grew up in Pennsylvania," she said, "not the city." "That answers it," he said. They rode out of Cedar Hollow as the sun was fully clearing the peaks, heading northeast along the river trail that ran parallel to the ridge. Silas kept to an easy pace. He watched the valley the way he always watched it, the way you watch something you have known so long and so well that you sometimes have to remind yourself it's extraordinary, that other people have spent their whole lives without ever seeing it. He wanted her to see it, not because he was trying to win something, but because it was the truest thing he had to show her. The letters had come from this place. Everything he had written, the colors, the sounds, the particular quality of the light through the aspens in October, had come from this valley, from years of being alone in it and learning its language. If she could see it, she might understand something about him that was very difficult to put into words. They rode for about 20 minutes in silence. Then Evelyn said, "You're not going to talk?" "I was waiting to see if you wanted to. That's unusually considerate. You mentioned in your 4th letter that you disliked men who fill silences just to hear their own voices." She was quiet for a moment. "You remember the 4th letter?" "I remember all of them." A longer pause. The river moved alongside them, quiet and low this time of year, catching the light in pieces. "I said that about my father's business partner," she said. "Mr. Aldous Phipps. He spoke continuously from the moment he arrived in a room until the moment he left it, and I always had the impression he was terrified of what he might hear in the quiet." "What do you hear?" Silas asked. She seemed to consider the question seriously. "Right now, the river. Some kind of bird on the left, a mountain bird, I don't know its name. Your horse's hooves on the rock, the wind." She paused. "It's very clean." "It is," he said. "You've been in it so long you don't notice it anymore." "I notice it every day," he said. "I just don't need to say so." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the trail. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Not in the way I mean." "Ike," she stopped. "You expected the letters to have come from a different kind of man," he said. "Not bitterly, just accurately. Softer," he said. "Smaller, less," she said. "I expected someone less." She hesitated. "That's not a kindness to say. It's honest," he said. "I'd rather have the honest version." She was quiet again. "Then the letter about the mist in the valley, October. You wrote that it was the loneliest, beautiful thing you'd ever seen." "I remember. How long had you been alone up here when you wrote that?" He thought about it. 11 years. She absorbed that. "By choice, by circumstance at first," he said. "Then by habit." Then he paused, choosing words carefully. Then I stopped asking myself the question, what made you start again? He looked at her then. An advertisement in a Pennsylvania newspaper, he said. About a woman who wanted to correspond with men living west of the Mississippi. She listed 3 requirements: good character, honest dealing. Someone who read books. He paused. I figured I had 2 out of 3, and the third I could improve on. Which one were you missing? Character's debatable, he said. I had plenty of books, but the honest dealing I'd spent most of my life keeping my own counsel. Putting words on paper for someone else to read felt like learning a new language, a beat. Turned out I liked it. You were good at it, she said quietly. You were better, he said. Your letters were, they had a particular quality. Like you'd thought through exactly what you meant before you wrote it. I'm a teacher, she said. Improvisation is a professional failing. No, it wasn't professional. It was. He stopped himself, suddenly aware that he was very close to saying something that might land wrong. Too soon. Too much. You wrote like you trusted the words, he said finally. Like you believed they'd carry what you meant. A long silence. Then Evelyn said very quietly, nobody has ever said that to me. He didn't answer. There was nothing to add to that. The valley held it. They rode for another hour. He showed her the place where the river forked and the old growth trees on the north-facing slope that were so large around the base that it would take 3 men to encircle one with their arms. He showed her the natural clearing about halfway up the ridge, where, on clear mornings, you could see so far east that the horizon looked like the edge of a different world. He didn't explain everything. He let some of it be what it was. He had learned from the letters that Evelyn was a person who liked to come to her own conclusions, and he had enough respect for her to let her. When they turned back toward Cedar Hollow in the late morning, she said, "You said you rescued a calf from a creek bed." Elk calf, last February. What happened to it? Raised it through the spring. Turned it loose in June, when it was big enough to manage. Did it survive? Saw it in September on the North Ridge, he said. Fat and mean as anything. Tried to charge at me. I took it as a sign of good health. This time she laughed, a real one, short, surprised at itself. Silas heard it and filed it away carefully. The way he filed away everything that mattered: the location of the best water, the coming of weather, the sound of the valley at different hours. He filed it where he kept the things he didn't want to lose. When they reached the boarding house, he swung down from Porter and stood at her stirrup. She dismounted without help, which he had expected, but he stood there anyway in case she wanted it. Tomorrow, he said, if you'd like. I'll be at the schoolhouse at 9. I'm fixing the south wall. The boards rotted through last winter. It's not much to look at, but I thought you might want to know it exists. She looked at him. You built the schoolhouse, mostly, he said. Some of the other men helped with the roof. Why? He picked up Porter's reins. Because there are 14 children in this valley, and 6 of them couldn't read their own names when I first came here. He paused. Seemed like something worth doing. She was quiet for a moment. 9 o'clock, she said. 9 o'clock, he agreed. He walked Porter back toward the livery, and he didn't look back, because he was fairly certain that if he did, she would see something on his face that he was not yet ready to show. He was 2 days into 2 weeks. He had, for the first time in a very long time, something he had almost forgotten the feeling of. He had hope, and hope in a man who had spent 17 years learning to live without it was a terrifying and extraordinary thing. He was at the schoolhouse before 8, not because he had planned to be early. He simply could not sleep past 4, which was the same as always, and after the usual work of the morning tending Porter, checking the fence line on the north side of the property. Eating something that technically counted as breakfast, there was no reason to stay up on the ridge. He told himself that. He repeated it twice on the ride down, just to make sure it sounded convincing. It did not particularly convince him. The south wall of the schoolhouse was in worse shape than he remembered. He had noticed the rotting boards back in August and told himself he'd get to it before the first hard freeze. Then September happened, and then the first of his focus had gone somewhere else entirely, specifically to 32 letters, and the question of whether any of them had been enough. He pulled the bad boards off one by one, stacking them to the side, working steadily and without hurry. The physical work was familiar in the way that only things you have done 10,000 times can be familiar. It lived in his hands and his shoulders, and the particular rhythm of his breathing, and it asked nothing of his mind. Which meant his mind was entirely free to go where it wanted to go. It went to her, to the way she had said nobody has ever said that to me, and the particular quality of quiet that had followed it. To the way she laughed that short, surprised laugh when he told her about the elk calf-like laughter was something that sometimes got away from her before she had properly approved it. He was pulling the third board when he heard her boots on the frozen ground. He didn't turn around immediately. He finished what his hands were doing, and then he turned, because he had learned a long time ago that often work, suddenly, to look at someone gave too much away. Evelyn was standing about 10 feet back, watching him work. She had a small notebook in her left hand. He did not ask about it. "South," she said, looking at the gap where the boards had been. "South wall," he confirmed. "How long will it take?" "Hour, maybe 2. Depends on the new boards." He set down what he was holding and looked at her properly. "You're early. I'm always up before 6. "So am I," she said. "Habit from the school year. Children don't believe in sleeping past dawn." He picked up a new plank and held it against the frame. "There's coffee inside. Mrs. Aldridge left a pot before she went to town. She runs the schoolhouse. Does the teaching 3 days a week. I told her I'd be working on the wall this morning." "Does she know about me?" He lined up the first nail. "This is Cedar Hollow," he said. "Everyone knows about you." "And what do they think?" He drove the nail with 3 clean strokes. "Mrs. Aldridge thinks you're brave. Hector Drummond thinks you're either very brave or very foolish, and he hasn't decided which. Margaret Fines has 3 separate theories about why a Pennsylvania schoolteacher would come all the way out here to meet a mountain man, and all 3 of them say more about Margaret than about you." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" He reached for another nail. "I think you read 32 letters and decided the person behind them was worth finding out about." He paused. "I think that takes a particular kind of courage that most people don't have." "Or a particular kind of foolishness," she said. "Could be both," he said. "The best things usually are." She moved closer and looked at what he was doing. Really looked, the way she looked at everything, with that particular focused attention that he had started to recognize as simply the way her mind worked. She was not the kind of person who glanced at things. She examined them. "Can I help?" He looked at her. "You want to help fix a wall?" "I grew up in Pennsylvania," she said. "Not the city." He almost smiled. "You said that yesterday." "It was true yesterday," she said. "It's still true today." He handed her a plank. They worked for the better part of an hour, Silas doing the heavier lifting and the nailing, Evelyn holding boards in place and handing him what he needed with an efficiency that surprised him, and then did not surprise him. Because nothing about her that suggested competence surprised him anymore. The letters had told him that clearly enough. He had just not expected it to manifest in the physical, practical way that it did, the way she braced a board without being asked, the way she read what the next step was before he told her. "You've done this before," he said at one point. "My uncle had a farm," she said. "When I was young, summer repairs were all hands." "Your uncle, not your father." She was quiet for a moment. A sorting quiet. "My father was a schoolmaster," she said. "He believed in books and indoor pursuits. My uncle was his brother, and they were as different as 2 men from the same family could be." She paused. "I loved them both differently." "Both gone," she said simply. "Some years back now." He did not offer condolence in the way that people offered condolence when they did not know what else to say. He simply said, "I'm sorry," and meant it, and let it be what it was. She handed him the next board. "Your family?" she asked. "Mother died when I was 12, he said. "Father lasted until I was 17. Then he took sick the second winter after we came west. I had a brother, but we lost touch when I moved up into the mountains." He hammered the nail. "I wrote him twice in the early years. Never heard back." Could be the letters didn't reach him. Could be they did. You don't know which. No, he said. I decided after a while that it mattered less than I thought it would. He looked at the wall rather than at her. The mountains are a good place for deciding what actually matters. They finished the south wall at 10:30. Evelyn stepped back and looked at it with the same expression she had used when she was examining the work in progress, evaluating, assessing, arriving at a conclusion. Good, she said. It'll hold, he agreed. I meant good as in well done, she said. I can see you put the boards in, even when it would have been faster not to. He looked at the wall. He had done that, he realized, matched the grain direction, made the seams as clean as the situation allowed. He had not thought about it consciously. It was just the way he did things. Old habit, he said. My father believed that if something was worth building, it was worth building right. He sounds like a good man. He was a particular man, Silas said. He had rules about things, not always the rules other people would have picked, but he held to them. He paused. He would have liked you. He heard himself say that, and felt the sharp awareness of having gone further than he intended. Evelyn looked at him steadily. Why? He respected people who thought before they spoke, Silas said. And who meant what they said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the wall. You're going to do the whole building eventually, aren't you? It was not a question. Eventually, he said. I try to do a section every fall before the freeze. Roof last year, south wall this year. North wall needs attention in the spring. Who taught here before Mrs. Aldridge? Nobody. I found Mrs. Aldridge 3 years ago. She'd come west with her husband. Then he passed, and she was in Cedar Hollow, with no income and no particular plan. She'd been a teacher back in Ohio. He picked up his tools. Seemed like a reasonable arrangement. You recruited her. I had a building and children. She had skills and needed a purpose. He shrugged. It made sense. Evelyn looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. You don't think of it as remarkable, she said. A woman needed work and children needed teaching, he said. What's remarkable about that? Most men would not have built the schoolhouse in the first place. Most men haven't spent 11 years watching children grow up without learning to read, he said. It came out more bluntly than he intended, not angry, just certain. The certainty of a man who had watched something be wrong for long enough that he stopped being able to see it as acceptable. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the notebook she'd been carrying since she arrived. Would you mind, she said, if I asked you some questions? I've been keeping notes. About the valley, about the community. He looked at the notebook. You're studying us. I'm trying to understand a place, she said. I can't understand a place without understanding the people in it. And I can't understand the people without asking. What kind of questions? The schoolhouse. How many children currently? What they learn, what they need. She looked up at him. And about you, if you're willing. What about me specifically? Whatever you're willing to say. He thought about it. He was a private man by nature and by long habit. 17 years of solitude had made privacy feel less like a preference and more like a fundamental condition of his existence. But she had come down from the ridge with him. She had held boards for an hour without complaint. She had asked questions that showed she was actually listening to the answers. Ask, he said. The questions she asked were not the ones he expected. She did not ask about his past in any dramatic way, or press at the scar, or want the kind of frontier story that people from the East sometimes wanted when they imagined the West. She asked about the valley, how many families, what they grew, what they lacked, where the nearest doctor was, what happened when someone got badly sick or badly hurt. She asked about the children by name, which surprised him, and he realized she must have gotten the names from Mrs. Hale or from her own careful observation of the town since she arrived. He answered everything. It was a strange experience, being asked questions by someone who listened to the answers with the same quality of attention that she had given the south wall of the schoolhouse fully, and without already having decided what she thought. You track all of this, she said at one point, looking at him rather than the notebook. The families. Who needs what when someone falls behind? Someone has to, he said. The townspeople, she said carefully. They depend on you. But they're all frightened of me, he said. Yes, both things are true at once. People are like that. He paused. I made my peace with it, did you? He looked at her. I understood it. I'm not sure peace was quite the word. There's a difference, she said. Yes, there is. She wrote something in the notebook. He did not try to read it. Evelyn, he said, and then stopped, because he had used her name, and he wasn't sure she'd given him permission to, and old habits of formality died hard even when they felt wrong. Go ahead, she said. The advertisement, he said. The one in the Pennsylvania paper. Did you answer many of them? Men writing west? She considered whether to answer. He could see her considering it. 3, she said, including you. The first wrote back twice, then stopped. I think he found someone closer to home. The second wrote for 4 months, and then his letters changed. They became less honest, more performance, like he had decided what I wanted to hear, and was writing that instead of himself. And me? He said. Your first letter, she said, began with an apology for the handwriting, because you had broken 2 fingers the previous winter and they had healed crookedly. Then you described the valley in 3 sentences that I've thought about ever since. She closed the notebook. And then you wrote. Do you remember what you wrote at the end of the first letter? He did. He could still see the page. I wrote that I didn't know if I was the kind of man a woman could make a life with, but that I was trying to figure out if I could become one. She looked at him steadily. Yes, she said, that. And that made you write back. That made me write back. He nodded slowly. Something settled in his chest, not relief exactly. More like the particular feeling of a thing clicking into its proper place. Come on, he said. I'll buy you that coffee from Drummond's before Mrs. Aldridge gets back and starts asking me questions I'm not ready for. They walked out into the cold morning together. The next 4 days passed in a rhythm that felt, to Silas, like something he had never quite experienced before, but recognized anyway, the way you recognize a word in a language you've only half learned. Understanding the shape of it before you understand all the sounds. Every morning he came down from the ridge. Every morning she was either already up or appeared within the half hour of his arriving. They did things together that were entirely ordinary. He showed her the river crossing, the place where the aspens were thickest, the slope where the elk came down in winter. She asked questions and took notes. She helped where help was useful and stood back where it was not. She was not a woman who needed to be told twice about anything. On the 3rd day she met Mrs. Aldridge, and within 20 minutes the two of them were deep in a conversation about reading methods for children who had missed early schooling that Silas could not follow and did not try to. He sat on a bench outside the schoolhouse and listened to the sound of 2 women who understood each other finding that out, and he felt something he could only call gratitude, though it was larger than that word. On the 4th day, something changed. It happened at Drummond's store, which was Cedar Hollow's central location for approximately 70% of its social activity, including commerce. Hector Drummond was a man of about 60 who had strong opinions about the weather, the government, the proper way to store flour, and the general direction of human civilization. And he shared these opinions freely with anyone who came to buy something from him. He also had, Silas had long ago determined, a good heart buried under several layers of practicality, skepticism, and the particular brand of frontier reserve that took years to move. Evelyn had gone in to buy writing supplies. Silas had gone in because he needed nails. This was entirely coincidental, though he noticed Drummond's expression suggested he did not believe that for a second. They were both at the counter when the door opened, and 3 men came in from outside trappers, by the look of them, passing through. The kind of men who came through Cedar Hollow in the fall, heading to higher ground for the winter season. Silas didn't recognize them, which meant they were not regulars. The one in front, big through the chest and with a beard that suggested he had not made peace with razors for some time, looked at Evelyn with the kind of open assessment that Silas had seen enough times to recognize immediately and despise. Well, the man said to nobody in particular, Somebody came a long way from somewhere civilized. Evelyn did not look up from examining the paper she was holding. Awful pretty for a place like this, the man continued, directing it more squarely at her now. His two companions had spread out slightly, the way groups of men do when one of them has decided to be entertaining and the others are waiting to see how it goes. "Reckon she's spoken for?" one of the others said, with a grin that had nothing friendly in it. Drummond had gone very still behind the counter. Silas put down the nails. He moved not fast, not aggressive, but with the steady, purposeful movement of a very large man who has decided something and is not uncertain about it until he was standing beside Evelyn. Not in front of her, beside her. There was a distinction, and he meant it. "The lady is here on business," he said. His voice was level and quiet in the way that very quiet voices can be louder than shouting when the person they belong to has a certain quality of stillness. "I'd appreciate it if you treated her accordingly." The big man looked at Silas. Something in his expression shifted the particular shift that happened when a man who had been reading a situation as opportunity suddenly revised his assessment. "No offense meant," the man said, in the slightly different register of a person who has decided that offense is not, in fact, the most interesting direction. "None taken," Silas said, "yet." The three men moved to the far end of the counter and occupied themselves with what they had actually come to buy. Evelyn placed her paper and her pen nib on the counter in front of Drummond without looking at Silas. "Thank you," she said, quietly, without turning her head. "You would have managed," he said. "Yes," she said. "I would have, but it's different when you don't have to." He looked at her. "It's a different thing," she said, "to be capable of handling something yourself, and to have someone stand beside you so you don't have to." She paused. "Most people don't understand the difference." Drummond was pretending to organize things under the counter, with intense and unconvincing focus. "I understand it," Silas said. "I know," she said. "That's why I thanked you." They walked out of the store into the cold afternoon, and the air between them had changed in some way that Silas could not fully name, but could absolutely feel the way you feel a change in the weather before any physical sign of it arrives. In some place behind your sternum that had no scientific explanation, but had also never once been wrong. He said nothing about it, neither did she. But that evening, sitting at his table in the ridge cabin with the lamp lit and the cold coming in hard around the window frames, he found himself starting a letter out of pure reflex, reaching for paper and pen the way he had reached for them for 7 months, and then stopping with his hand on the page. He didn't need to write her a letter. She was a quarter mile down the mountain. He sat with that for a while, the strangeness of it. The extraordinary, ordinary strangeness of another person being close enough to reach, after so long. He put the paper away. The twist came on the 5th day, and it came from the last direction he would have anticipated. He was at the livery, tending porter, when Jeb Calloway found him. Jeb was the youngest of the Calloway brothers, 23 years old, and had the kind of face that was permanently arranged into an expression of mild grievance with the world. He leaned against the livery door with his arms crossed in a way that was clearly intended to look, and achieved the opposite. "Mountain man," Jeb said. Silas continued brushing porter. "Jeb, heard your Eastern lady has been all over town asking questions." There was something in the way his Eastern lady slightly too flat, slightly too deliberate, that Silas recognized as the precursor to something unpleasant. "She's a curious person," Silas said. "She asks questions. It's one of the things I respect about her. She was talking to my mother yesterday." "Your mother knows everyone in this valley. Seems like a reasonable person to talk to." Jeb pushed off the doorframe. He was not a large man, and he did not try to pretend to be. But he had the particular belligerence of men who feel passed over by things they believe they deserved. "She's not staying," he said. "You know that, right? Women like that, they come out here, and they look around, and then they go back. Every time. They always go back." Silas stopped brushing. He turned around slowly. "Jeb," he said, "what you mean to say, if you want to be honest about it, is that you're scared she'll stay?" Jeb's face did something complicated. "What's that supposed to mean?" It means you've got a sister who's been talking about going east for 2 years, and you know it. And you're watching a woman from the east come here and look at this valley like it might be worth something, and it's messing with the story you've been telling yourself about why your sister should leave. He held Jeb's gaze. That's a personal problem, Jeb. Don't make it mine. Jeb stared at him for a moment, then his jaw tightened. She's going to leave you, he said, and you're going to be back up on that ridge alone, and the whole town's going to have watched you make a fool of yourself for a woman who didn't even. Jeb, one word. Jeb stopped. I know the risks, Silas said. I've known them since I sent the first letter. I took them anyway, because I decided a long time ago that living scared of the things that might not work out was a worse kind of loneliness than the one I already had. He picked up the brush again. You can want it to go wrong if you need to. That's your business. But don't stand in my livery and tell me what the outcome's going to be. You don't know. Neither do I, and that's the point. Jeb stood in the doorway a moment longer, then he left. Silas finished with Porter and stood in the quiet of the livery for a while, his hand on the horse's neck. Porter turned his head and looked at him with the magnificent indifference of a horse that had been through a good deal and considered most of it manageable. Don't, Silas told him. Porter looked away. He found Evelyn at Mrs. Hale's in the late afternoon, sitting on the porch with the notebook open and a pen in her hand. Though she wasn't writing, she was looking toward the mountains with the particular expression of someone who is working something out. You had a visitor, she said when he came up the steps. Jeb Calloway. He came to see me this morning before he came to you. Silas stopped. What did he say? He said that this valley was not a place for women who had other options. He said that men like you were better left alone because she paused, because trying to change the nature of a thing never ended well. Something cold moved through Silas's chest, not at Jeb, at the words themselves, and the fact that she had been sitting with them all day. What did you tell him? He asked. Evelyn closed the notebook. I told him I hadn't come here to change anything, she said. I came to see what was real. She looked up at Silas. And then I asked him how long he'd lived here, and whether he'd ever once climbed far enough up the north ridge to see the valley from above. Silas looked at her. He hadn't, she said. He's lived here his whole life and never gone up far enough to see it. She said it without contempt. Just with the precision of someone noting a fact and finding it instructive. I think that's what he meant about not changing the nature of things. He's never seen it from the outside. And you have? I arrived from the outside, she said. That's different. She opened the notebook again, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at him. Silas, when Jeb came to see you. What did he say? He said you'd leave. And what did you say? That I knew the risks and I'd taken them anyway. She held his gaze for a moment. Good, she said. It was such a plain, simple word. Good. Said without decoration or drama. Said the way she said everything, like she meant exactly what she said and not a syllable more. He sat down on the step below the porch rail, not at her level but close. It was the first time they had been still together, without something to do or somewhere to walk, and he felt the particular weight of that. The fact that being still with another person was an entirely different proposition from doing things alongside them. Tell me something, she said. All right, when you wrote the letters. Was there a moment when you stopped writing to a stranger and started writing to someone specific, someone real? He thought about it properly. He owed her that. 6th letter, he said. You wrote back about the winter you were 22 and your father was sick, and you taught the school by yourself for 4 months and didn't tell anyone how frightened you were because there was nobody to tell. He paused. You wrote it like it was a small thing, like it was just a fact about a season. But I read it, and I thought this person knows what it is to hold something alone. This person understands that particular kind of weight. He looked at his hands. That was when you stopped being a stranger. The porch was quiet. My 5th letter, she said. You wrote about the night you got the scar. The rock slide. You were alone and injured, and you said the hardest part wasn't the pain. The hardest part was knowing that if it had been worse, nobody would have known where to look for you. She paused. And then you wrote that it had made you realize the difference between choosing solitude and simply being forgotten. And that you weren't sure until that night which one yours had been. He was very still. That was when you stopped being a stranger to me, she said. Outside, the town moved through its late afternoon business. Someone called to someone else down the street. A horse passed. The cold was coming in off the mountains earlier than it had been, the way it did when October was finishing itself. I'm going to say something, Silas said, and I need you to tell me if I'm moving too fast. All right, she said. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, he said. I'm not trying to build a case. I just need you to know that whatever you decide at the end of 2 weeks, whether you stay or you go, the time between now and then has already been something I didn't know I was going to have. He paused. I didn't know what it felt like to have someone listen to me. I'd forgotten. I think maybe I never fully knew. He looked at her. So thank you for that. Regardless, Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Silas, she said, I need to tell you something too. He waited. I wrote to 3 men, she said, and I came west to meet one of them. She closed the notebook fully and set it aside. I want you to understand that I did not make that decision lightly. I am not an impulsive person. I am not a romantic in the way the word is usually meant. I don't believe in signs or fate or the idea that things are meant to be. She paused. I believe in evidence. I believe in paying attention. I believe in deciding carefully, and then standing by what you've decided. Yes, he said. I know, I have been paying attention, she said. Since the moment I stepped off that train. He said nothing. What I've seen, she said, is a man who does what he says. Who builds things because they're worth building. Who notices when someone is holding something alone and does not look away from it. She looked at him squarely. Who stands beside someone rather than in front of them. He held very still. I haven't made any decision, she said. Don't mistake this for a decision. I'm telling you what I've observed, because you told me something true, and I think you deserve something true in return. She picked up the notebook again. But I am paying attention, very carefully. He stood up. Evelyn, he said. Yes? Would you like to come up to the ridge tomorrow? There's something I'd like to show you. It's not, he paused, looking for the honest version of what he meant to say. It's not impressive. It's not a view or a landmark or anything you'd put in a letter. It's just a place that matters to me, and I'd like you to see it. She looked at him steadily. Yes, she said, I would. He put his hat back on. He said, dress warm. He walked back toward the livery, and this time he was absolutely certain she was watching him go, and absolutely certain he was right to have asked. She was ready at 6:45. Silas saw her standing outside the boarding house when he rode in, and he registered 2 things simultaneously: that she was early, which did not surprise him, and that she was watching him come down the main street with an expression he could not fully read from a distance. By the time he pulled Porter up and swung down, she had it composed again into something more neutral. But he had seen it. He filed it away. You said 7, she said. You said you're always up before 6, he said. I adjusted. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to Clover, who was tied alongside Porter, and checked the girth with the practiced hand of someone who did not take other people's knot tying on faith. He approved of that. 2 hours up, he said. Less coming down. And what is it you want to show me? I told you last night, he said. It's not impressive. You also told me it matters to you, she said. Those aren't usually the same thing. He looked at her. No, he said. They're not. They rode out of Cedar Hollow before the town was properly awake, just the 2 of them, and the horses and the cold, that came off the mountain in the early morning like something with intention. He set a moderate pace, not slow enough to be treating her carefully, not fast enough to be testing her. She kept up without comment. For the first hour they rode mostly in silence, which he had come to understand was not absence between them, but presence. The particular presence of 2 people who had learned that silence was not a problem to be solved. She broke it first, about 40 minutes in, which was becoming a pattern he recognized. Jeb Calloway, she said. Has he always been like that? He's 23 years old, and he thinks the world owes him more than it's delivered, Silas said. That's not unique to Jeb. A lot of men feel that way. Most of them grow out of it. Will he? Depends on whether something happens that makes him look outward instead of inward, Silas said. Could go either way. His mother is a good woman, Evelyn said. Agnes Calloway. She talked to me for almost an hour yesterday afternoon. She knows everything about this valley, who needs what, which families are struggling, which children are falling behind in the schoolhouse. She paused. She knows a great deal about you. Agnes Calloway has been keeping track of me for 15 years, Silas said. I imagine she knows things I've forgotten. She said you brought firewood to her winter for 8 years without ever knocking on the door. Just left it stacked on the porch. He said nothing. She figured it out eventually, Evelyn continued. She said she waited one December morning before dawn and watched from the window. A pause. She cried telling me about it. Agnes cries at most things, Silas said. Silas, yes, why did you never knock? He thought about how to answer that honestly. Because if I knocked, he said, she'd feel like she had to say something about it. And she had enough to carry without adding gratitude to the pile. He paused. It was firewood. It wasn't charity. I had more wood than I needed, and she had less than she should. That's not a complicated equation. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. You do know, she said carefully, that most people would consider that remarkable. Most people overcomplicate simple things, he said. She made a sound that might have been agreement, or might have been something else entirely. He let it be what it was. They reached the top of the second ridge climb about an hour and 15 minutes out, and Silas turned Porter off the main trail onto a narrower path that cut through a stand of old pines, their boots brushing the low branches on both sides. He heard Evelyn's horse shift and adjust behind him, and heard her settle it with a quiet word. She was a good rider. He had known she would be. Almost there, he said. You've been saying that for 20 minutes. Last time, he said. 2 minutes later, he stopped. It was a flat shelf of rock about 40 feet across, on the eastern face of the ridge, where the mountain stepped back from itself and created a natural platform. There was a single pine at the far edge, old and enormous, its roots gripping the rock in a way that looked impossible and permanent at the same time. Below the shelf, the valley spread out in every direction, and the morning light was coming in low and flat from the east, making everything look like it had been cut from something rather than grown. But he had said he wasn't going to talk about the view. There was a small structure at the base of the pine, not really a structure, more like an arrangement. Flat stones stacked carefully into a low wall about 2 feet high, enclosing a space roughly 6 feet by 6 feet. Inside the space, a wooden cross, weathered to gray, with a name carved into it. Evelyn pulled Clover up beside him and looked at it. Your father, she said. Yes. She looked at him rather than at the marker. You carried him up here. It's where he asked to be, Silas said. He came up here the summer before he died, found this shelf. Sat here most of a day. He swung down from Porter and tied him to the pine. He told me he'd looked at every part of the valley he'd known and never seen all of it at once until that day. He said when it was time, he wanted to stay where he could see it. Evelyn dismounted quietly and stood beside him. The stone wall, she said. You built that. Over about 3 years, brought the stones up one trip at a time. He looked at the wall. Some of the stones he had placed 12 years ago. Some he had added as recently as last spring. Keeps the animals back. And it gives me something to do when I come up here. How often do you come? Often enough. She was quiet for a moment. Then she walked toward the marker, slowly, and crouched down to read the carving. He watched her and felt the particular vulnerability of having brought someone to a place that had only ever held him. Thomas Wren, she read, 1821 to 1878. He died at 57, Silas said. He thought that was a reasonable number of years. He said most of the men he'd respected most had died younger. Did you agree? I thought it was too few years, Silas said. I still do. She stood up and turned around to look at him. Her back was to the valley, and the light was behind her, and he could see her face clearly. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "I wanted you to see it," he said. "I've never brought anyone here before. It felt," he paused, looking for the honest word, "it felt like you should see it. Because of the letters. Because of what you understood about being alone with something heavy." He looked at the marker. "I wanted someone who knew what that felt like, to stand in this place with me." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something he had not anticipated. She crossed the distance between them, 6'7" at most, and she put her hand on his arm. Not a grip, not a gesture of comfort in the formal sense. Just her hand resting on his arm for the span of about 10 seconds. Then she stepped back. "He would have liked that you came back," she said. "With the stones." "I hope so," Silas said quietly. "I don't know. I tell myself he would." "He would," she said. With the certainty of someone who had read enough of a man in letters to know something about where he came from. He believed her. They stayed on the shelf for nearly an hour. Silas did not fill the time they sat near the base of the old pine, and she asked questions, and he answered them, and the questions were not careful anymore, not the measured questions of someone gathering information about an unfamiliar place. They were the questions a person asks when they have stopped cataloging and started simply wanting to know. She asked about the first winter he'd spent on the mine alone. He told her about it, the cold he had not fully prepared for, the week in February when the temperature dropped. So far the river stopped moving, and he had genuinely believed for 3 days that he might not come through to the other side. She asked him what he had thought about during those 3 days. "My father mostly," he said, "and whether I'd made a mistake coming out here alone." He paused. "And whether I'd done enough good things to justify the amount of food I'd eaten over my life." She laughed, a real one, full and unguarded. It startled a jay out of the pine above them. "That's a very particular kind of self-assessment," she said. "It was 3 days with nothing to do but think," he said. "A man covers ground. And what conclusion did you reach?" "Probably about even," he said. "I decided to tip it forward if I got the chance." She looked at him. "You've been tipping it forward ever since." "Trying to," he said. "The firewood," she said. "The schoolhouse. The fences you fix for people without asking for anything." She said it like she was reading a list aloud, but not in a cataloging way. "In the way you recount things that have accumulated meaning." "Those are small things," he said. "Small things done consistently over 15 years, she said, are not small." He had no answer for that. He looked at the valley instead, which had no opinion on the matter, but was at least consistent. They rode down an hour later, and the descent was faster, as he'd told her it would be. Coming back into town, she was quiet with the particular quality of someone who is processing rather than withdrawing, and he left her to it. It was at the bottom of the main street that things changed. He heard it before he saw it, a raised voice, the particular register of a confrontation rather than a disagreement, and the sound of people moving in the way people move when something is happening that they want to watch, but cannot quite decide whether to get involved in. He and Evelyn came around the corner of the livery to find half the town's daytime population gathered in front of Drummond's store. At the center of it, Jeb Calloway, who was angrier than Silas had seen him since the business with the Hennessy fence 2 years back, and a man Silas didn't recognize, well-dressed by frontier standards, Eastern cut to his coat, with a quality about him that Silas registered immediately as money. Not old money, not earned money, the kind of money that had been used for long enough that the person wearing it had stopped noticing it was there. The man was holding a piece of paper and talking to Drummond, who was answering in the careful tones of someone who has understood that a situation requires careful tones. Evelyn stiffened in the saddle beside him. He looked at her. She was staring at the well-dressed man with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something between recognition and something that was not quite dread but adjacent to it. "Evelyn," he said quietly. "That's Richard Harlow," she said. Her voice was exactly level, too level. "Who is he?" A pause. "He's a man from Philadelphia," she said. He was. "He's a man who proposed to me 8 months ago." The cold moved differently in Silas's chest this time. "And you said no," he said, not a question. Statement of fact placed carefully. "I said I would think about it," she said. "And then I answered the advertisement in the paper." He looked at the man Richard Harlow standing in front of Drummond's store with his Eastern coat and his paper, and the particular posture of a man who was accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room he entered. "Does he know you're here?" Silas asked. "No," she said. I didn't tell him where I was going. I told him I needed time to consider and that I would write to him when I had an answer." She paused. "I have not written to him, and yet here he is." "Yes," she said quietly, "here he is." Jeb Calloway chose that moment to turn around, and his eyes landed on Silas and Evelyn, and his expression did something quick and complicated surprise first. Then the particular satisfaction of a man who feels a situation is moving in the direction he predicted. "Miss Whitaker," Jeb said loudly enough to carry, "I believe you've got company." Every head in the vicinity turned. Richard Harlow turned. He saw Evelyn, and whatever expression he had been wearing rearranged itself into something that was very precisely calculated to appear relieved, and that Silas did not believe for a single second. Evelyn. Harlow crossed the distance toward them, ignoring Jeb, ignoring Silas, ignoring the entire assembled audience with the practiced ease of a man who was used to walking through spaces as though they existed primarily to frame him. "I've been looking for you for a month." Evelyn had not moved from the saddle. Silas had not moved either. He was aware of this, and aware that staying mounted was creating a particular dynamic, the two of them above the crowd, Harlow having to look up, and he was honest enough with himself to admit he was not entirely unhappy about that dynamic. "Richard," Evelyn said. Her voice was composed. "How did you find me?" "Your friend Mrs. Alcott," he said. "She let slip you'd gone west to meet someone." He said someone with a very specific quality of restraint. "I have to say, Evelyn, I expected a letter." "I did not He glanced at Silas for the first time, and it was the glance of a man who had looked at a piece of furniture and found it broadly where he expected it. This. "What did you expect?" Evelyn asked. "I expected a response," he said. "A letter. Any communication at all. We had an understanding." "We had a proposal and an incomplete answer," Evelyn said. "Those are not the same thing." Harlow's expression flickered. Just briefly. He looked at Silas again, this time with more attention. "Who is this?" "This is Silas Wren," Evelyn said. "It is his valley and his community you've ridden into." Harlow extended his hand upward toward Silas with the smooth confidence of a man who had never had a handshake go wrong. "Harlow, Richard Harlow, Philadelphia." Silas took the hand and shook it once. "Wren," he said. Something in Harlow's expression shifted as he felt the handshake the size of Silas's hand, the particular quality of it, the fact that the man on the horse did not perform anything. Did not smile, did not work to fill the social space. "I need to speak with Evelyn," Harlow said, privately. "If you don't mind." "I don't mind anything," Silas said. "It's not my conversation." He looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. Something in her eyes that he could read clearly now, not the uncertainty of a woman who didn't know what she wanted. The controlled expression of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, and was asking him without words to trust her with it. He dismounted, handed Clover's reins to her without ceremony. Walked Porter toward the livery without looking back. Every step he took was deliberate. Every step was the hardest thing he had done in weeks. Because the easiest thing in the world in that moment would have been to stay. To plant himself where he was and let his size and his presence say the things he had no right to say yet. To be the wall between her and the man from Philadelphia who had come 1,000 miles to take back something that may never have fully belonged to him. But he had told her he would not try to convince her of anything. He meant it. He got Porter into the livery stall and stood there with his hand on the horse's neck, and he breathed in the cold and the hay and the solid ordinary smell of a place where things made sense, and he waited. He did not wait long. 15 minutes. Evelyn appeared in the livery doorway. She had her notebook in her hand, and her expression was the particular composed expression he was beginning to understand as the expression she wore when she had passed through something difficult and come out. the other side, and was now simply at the other side. "He came to take me back," she said. She paused. "He made certain arrangements for a wedding. In June. He says I owe him the courtesy of returning with him to Philadelphia and at minimum having the conversation in proper circumstances." Silas said nothing. He pointed out, she continued, that I left without an answer. That in doing so I treated him poorly. That regardless of whatever, she paused again, whatever this is, I owed him more than I gave him. "Is he right?" Silas asked. She looked at him squarely. "Yes," she said. "He is. I treated him poorly. I should have given him a proper no instead of silence." "Did you give him one now?" The silence stretched exactly 3 seconds. "I told him I would speak with him tomorrow morning," she said. "Over breakfast, and give him a proper answer." Something heavy moved through Silas's chest. "All right," he said. "Silas." She stepped into the livery, away from the open door, away from whatever portion of the town was still watching. "I need you to understand something. Tell me Richard Harlow is a good man," she said. "He is stable and educated, and he has never once treated me with anything less than respect. He has means and reputation, and he is exactly the kind of man my mother would have chosen for me, with complete confidence that she had done the right thing." She held his gaze. "And I did not answer his advertisement. I answered yours." He took that in slowly. "I need you to know that I did not come here running away from something," she said. "I came here running toward something. There is a difference." "Yes," he said, "there is. What I told you on the porch," she said. "About paying attention, about what I've observed." She set the notebook down on the livery rail beside her. "That was not something I said carelessly. I didn't think it was. I am going to speak with Richard tomorrow," she said. "And I am going to give him the answer he should have had 8 months ago." And then, she paused, and something in her face shifted, some layer of control relaxing by a fraction, and then "I'd like to come back up to the ridge. If the invitation is still open." "It's open," he said immediately. She picked up the notebook, turned toward the livery door. "Evelyn," he said. She stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, and then stopped himself, because what he wanted to say was large, and the time for it was not quite now, not yet, not until tomorrow was done with. "Get some rest," he said instead. "It's been a long day." She looked at him over her shoulder, with an expression she told him, clearly and without words, that she knew exactly what he had stopped himself from saying. "Good night, Silas," she said. She walked out into the early evening. He stood in the livery for a long time after that, in the dark and the cold and the smell of horses and hay, and he thought about a man in a good coat who had come 1,000 miles for a woman who had not written to him. He thought about what that meant, not about the man, but about the woman. The woman who had gotten on a train with 32 letters and 1 incomplete answer and traveled 1,500 miles not to run from something but toward it. He thought about that and he let it be what it was. He did not sleep well. He was not the kind of man who pretended he had slept well when he had not, and by 5 in the morning he had given it up entirely and was sitting at the table in the ridge cabin with a lamp and a piece of paper, because some things were habits built too deep to break. He did not write to Evelyn. He wrote to himself, the way he had sometimes done, in the years before he started writing to her, not a letter, not a proper document. Just a working out of something in the way that writing forced a certain honesty that thinking alone sometimes allowed you to avoid. He wrote, "She is going to give him her answer today. Either she is coming back or she is not. You knew this was the risk from the first letter and you sent it anyway. Whatever she decides, you will mean what you said. You will buy her ticket yourself, and you will not say a word to stop her. That is the only honorable position. The rest is not up to you." He read it back. He wrote underneath it, "You are in love with her." He looked at that sentence for a long time. Then he put the paper in the lamp flame and watched it go. He was down the mountain by 7, which was early even for him. He did not go to the boarding house. He went to the schoolhouse because Mrs. Aldridge had 3 children who were behind on their reading and had asked him 2 weeks ago if he would sit with them on Friday mornings while she worked with the older students. And Friday was today, and a commitment was a commitment, regardless of what else was happening. He sat at the low table with 3 children: Martha, age 7, and the 2 Hendricks boys, 8 and 9, and he helped them through their words with the same steady patience he brought to everything. Martha had a tendency to skip letters when she was nervous. The younger Hendricks boy confused his B's and D's in a way that was entirely normal and would resolve with time. The older one was the kind of reader who would be excellent in 6 months, and was simply impatient with the distance between now and 6 months. Silas knew something about that kind of patience. He was still at the table, Martha successfully completing a full sentence on her own for the first time, and looking at him with an expression of absolute disbelieving triumph when the schoolhouse door opened. He looked up. It was not Evelyn, it was Agnes Calloway. She was a compact, capable woman who moved like someone who had never once in her life had the luxury of moving slowly, and she was wearing an expression that Silas could not immediately read except to know that it was significant. "Silas," she said, "you need to come." Martha was still looking at him with her sentence. "You did that perfectly," he told her. Then he stood up and followed Agnes out of the schoolhouse. "Where?" he said. "The boarding house," Agnes said. She was walking fast. "There's been a Jeb spoke to Mr. Harlow last night, after supper." He told him. She paused, and the pause had the quality of a woman who was genuinely distressed. "Jeb told him things about Miss Whittaker and you. Things he had no business saying. Things he made sound worse than they are." Silas stopped walking. Agnes stopped too and turned to face him. "What things?" he said. He told Mr. Harlow that you and Miss Whittaker had been spending every day alone together, riding into the mountains, going up to your father's grave. Agnes's voice had a tightness in it that was very close to anger, and he made it sound improper. "Silas," Agnes said, and she stopped. "What else?" Agnes looked at him squarely. He told Mr. Harlow that you had essentially lured her out here with romantic letters, and that you had taken advantage of her trust and her distance from home, to keep her here beyond what was decent. The cold in Silas's chest was a different kind this time. "Where is she?" he said. "At the boarding house," Agnes said. "Mr. Harlow showed up at breakfast this morning with Jeb's version of events, and she paused. He made accusations, Silas, in front of Mrs. Hale and 2 of the other boarders. He said he had come to take Evelyn home and protect her from a man who had used correspondence to take her away from what was proper," Silas said flatly. "Yes." He was already moving. He covered the distance to the boarding house in the kind of deliberate stride that was not running, but was everything except running, and when he came through the front door, Mrs. Hale looked up from the front hallway with an expression that told him everything he needed to know about the atmosphere of the last 40 minutes. He could hear voices from the sitting room. Harlow's voice, controlled, persuasive, the voice of a man who had made his living using words to arrange the world in the shape he wanted. And underneath it, quieter but absolutely steady, Evelyn's. He stepped into the doorway. The sitting room held 4 people: Mrs. Hale, who had clearly refused to leave; Margaret Fiennes, who had definitely not been invited, but was constitutionally incapable of being absent from significant events; Richard Harlow, standing near the window; and Evelyn, seated in the chair near the fireplace, her notebook closed on the table beside her, her hands folded in her lap with a composure that Silas recognized as costing her something. Harlow looked up when Silas appeared in the doorway. Something moved through his expression: surprise first, then a recalculation, and then the deliberate adoption of the kind of cold courtesy that certain men used as a weapon. "Mr. Wren," he said, "I was just speaking with Evelyn about the situation." "I know what you were speaking about," Silas said. His voice was very quiet. He kept his position in the doorway. "He did not come further into the room, and I know what Jeb Calloway told you." "Then you'll understand my concern," Harlow said. "A woman I care about, traveling alone to an unfamiliar territory to meet a man she has never seen, spending days alone with that man in isolated locations." "I understand what you're suggesting," Silas said. "And I'm telling you it's wrong. Can you tell me nothing inappropriate has occurred?" "I can tell you exactly what has occurred," Silas said, And then he laid it out plainly, without heat, without performance. Every day, every interaction, the work at the schoolhouse, the ride to the valley, the hour on the ridge at his father's grave. He said each thing the way he said everything precisely, because precision was the only thing worth offering when something important was on the line. She has been treated with nothing but respect, he said. Because that is the only way I know to treat a person. The room was very quiet. Then Evelyn stood up. She had not said a word since Silas had appeared in the doorway. She had sat with her hands folded and her expression composed while the two men spoke, and he had understood, watching her, that she was letting it play out, that she was a woman who understood when to wait and when to speak, and that the moment to speak had arrived. "Richard," she said, "I need you to listen to me now." Harlow turned to her. "I should have written to you 8 months ago," she said. "I should have given you a clear answer instead of a delay. That was wrong of me and I am sorry for it. You came a long way based on a silence that wasn't fair to you." She paused. "But what Jeb Calloway told you is a version of events designed to serve Jeb Calloway's purposes, not the truth. And the conclusions you drew from it belong to a version of me that you have decided on, rather than the one standing in front of you." Harlow's jaw tightened slightly. "Evelyn, I am not finished," she said. He stopped. "I came here of my own decision," she said. "I stayed of my own decision. Every day I have spent this valley has been a day I chose. Nobody has taken advantage of me. Nobody has manipulated me. I am a grown woman who read 32 letters and made a considered judgment and traveled 1,500 miles to see whether that judgment was correct." She held his gaze. "I believe it was. The room held that." Then she t Silas, and the look was not uncertain and it was not complicated. It was the look of a woman who had sorted something out and arrived somewhere she had been moving toward for a while. "I am not coming back to Philadelphia," she said, "not to Silas. To Harlow, clearly and finally, I am sorry for the months of silence. You deserved better than that, but my answer is no. It was always going to be no. I just needed to know what I was choosing instead." Harlow looked at Silas. Something in his expression past the composure, past the calculation, was something that might, in a different man, in a different moment, have been recognizable as genuine pain. He had come a long way for this. Silas could not entirely blame him. "You're certain," Harlow said. "I am certain," she said. A long pause. Then Harlow nodded, once, with the grace of a man who had lost something, and knew that further argument would only diminish what remained of his dignity. "I'll make arrangements," he said. "I'll leave tomorrow." He walked past Silas in the doorway without looking at him. His footsteps went up the stairs. The room breathed. Mrs. Hale found something extremely important to do in the back of the house. Margaret Fines followed her, which was unprecedented, and suggested that even Margaret understood some moments were not for audiences. And then it was just the two of them, Silas in the doorway. Evelyn beside the fireplace. "You heard all of it," she said. "I heard enough." She looked at him. "You should have heard what I told Agnes on the porch before I went in," she said. "What did you tell her?" "That I had already decided before he came to breakfast this morning," she said. "That Jeb's accusations didn't change anything. That what they changed was only the timeline that I was going to say what I said this morning either way, only I was going to say it more quietly, and with less of an audience." He looked at her. "I had already decided," she repeated. "Quietly, last night, after I left the livery." She picked up the notebook from the table. "I had already decided." Silas felt something move through him that was too large to name and too particular to fit any word he had ready for it. He stood in the doorway of Mrs. Hale's sitting room in Cedar Hollow, Colorado, 17 years into a life he had built alone, and he felt it arrive the way the first real warmth of spring arrived, not all at once, not with drama, but undeniably, and with the quiet certainty of something that was not going to leave. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes," she said. He stepped into the room. He stepped into the room and she did not step back. That was the first thing he registered. Every time before on the platform, at the livery, on the ridge, there had been some small distance she maintained, not from fear. He understood that now, but from the careful habit of a woman who had spent years being precise about what she let close. She had not stepped back. He stopped 2 feet from her. "I want to say something," he said, "and I need to say it right." "All right," she said. "I have been careful," he said. "Since the platform, I made myself a rule that I would not push. That I would show you what was real and let you make up your own mind without me trying to steer the outcome." He paused. "I meant that rule." "I know," she said. "But I need you to know something that isn't about convincing you," he said. "Because I put that paper in the fire this morning, and I think it was a mistake to burn it instead of saying it." She went very still. "I love you," he said. "I don't know when it happened. I think it was somewhere around the 6th letter, which was a long time ago, and I have been carrying it since then the way I carry most things, quietly and without a great deal of ceremony." He looked at her steadily. "You don't have to say anything back. I'm not telling you because I want something from you. I'm telling you because it's true, and you have come a very long way, and you have been honest with me about important things, and you deserve the same in return." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You burned the paper." "Yes. What did it say before you burned it?" He held her gaze. "That I was in love with you." "Just that," he said. "Some things only need one sentence." She looked down at the notebook in her hands. She was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably 10 seconds. Then she looked up. "I am not a woman who falls quickly," she said. "I want you to understand that. I am not impulsive, and I am not romantic in the way people use that word. I analyze things. I observe things. I come to conclusions slowly and I hold them carefully because I have learned that conclusions made in a hurry are usually wrong." "I know," he said. "I have been coming to a conclusion," she said. Slowly, since approximately the 6th letter, he was very still. "I didn't know what to do with it," she said. It seemed she paused, searching for the precise word, implausible. That a person could know what they felt about someone they had never seen. "I told myself it was the letters, that I had fallen in love with words, and that the man behind them might be entirely different." "And," he said. "And he was not different," she said. "He was exactly the same." She looked at him with the full, clear attention she brought to everything that mattered to her. "Exactly the same man, just visible now, which is better." He breathed. "I'm not saying it perfectly," she said, with a flicker of something that was almost frustration with herself. "You're saying it exactly right," he said. She set the notebook on the table. Deliberately. Like setting something down that she no longer needed to hold in front of her. "What do we do now?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "I've never done this before." "Neither have I," she said. "I mean, but not like this. Not from this point." "We figure it out," he said, carefully and without hurrying. She looked at him. "That I can do," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I said it." The corner of her mouth moved. And then, because he had been keeping count, and because this was different from the others, fuller, more certain, directed entirely at him, he felt it the way you feel weather change. In the place behind his sternum, where things that mattered lived. She picked up the notebook. "I have questions," she said. "Of course you do," he said. "Practical ones. Go ahead." The 2 weeks were day 7. Day 8, he said. "Today's Friday. Day 8, she said. You said 2 weeks to make a decision. Does the decision change what the remaining days look like?" He thought about that. "It doesn't have to look like anything different," he said. "We keep doing what we've been doing. You see more of the valley. I keep fixing things. You ask questions and I answer them." He paused. "Except now we know what we're working toward, instead of wondering about it." She considered this. "That seems reasonable. I'm a reasonable man," he said. "You're an unusually reasonable man," she said. "I'm still determining whether that's something I'll get used to." "Do you want to?" he said, not genuinely. She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I want to." Richard Harlow left Cedar Hollow the following morning. Silas did not see him go. He was up on the ridge by 6, running the fence line on the north property, which needed it regardless of everything else. He came down at 8 and Evelyn was at the schoolhouse helping Mrs. Aldridge organize the readers by level, which was something she had apparently decided to do on her own initiative, which did not surprise him. What happened in the next 6 days was not dramatic in the way the first week had been dramatic. It was something different, something that had its own particular weight and quality, the weight of two people learning the actual texture of each other, past the letters, past the tension of uncertainty, into the ordinary. She was not easy, in the way that particular kind of person is never easy, the kind who notices everything, who thinks before she speaks, but when she speaks means exactly what she says, who has standards that are internal rather than performed and therefore non-negotiable. She disagreed with him 3 times in those 6 days. About the proper way to season venison, which was a minor disagreement and ended in a draw. About whether Jeb Calloway deserved the benefit of the doubt, which was a longer conversation and ended with both of them partially convinced by the other. And about whether the north wall of the schoolhouse should be replaced in spring or could wait another year, which became a surprisingly heated conversation that Silas lost cleanly and knew it, which he told her. "You could have argued longer," she said. "Most people would have." "Most people don't like being wrong," he said. "I just don't like it." "There's a difference." She wrote something in the notebook. "You're writing down things I say," he said. "I've been writing down things you say since day 2, she said, without looking up. "Should I be concerned about that? Probably not," she said. "You're doing well." He looked at her. She was entirely serious and entirely amused at the same time, which he was coming to understand was a state she occupied fairly frequently. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes, what is actually in that notebook?" She looked up, held the notebook slightly closer to her chest. "Observations," she said. "About me, about the valley. About the community, about the children's reading levels. About the rate at which the river drops in October. About," she paused. "Yes, some of them about you." "What kind of observations?" She opened the notebook, flipped several pages. "On day 3, she said, I wrote, he does not explain himself to people who have already decided not to understand him. This is either wisdom or resignation, and I believe it is wisdom." She turned another page. Day 5. He holds things in his left hand when he is listening carefully, whether or not he is holding anything. He is not aware that he does this. She looked up. "You do. Your left hand closes slightly when you're paying attention." He looked at his left hand. He hadn't known that. Day 6, she continued. He said the best things usually require both courage and foolishness. I think this is true. I think he lives by it without knowing he does. She closed the notebook. "Should I continue?" "No," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, because something in hearing his own life described back to him from the outside, from her outside, had done something to his chest that he hadn't prepared for. "I'm a teacher," she said more quietly. "Observation is how I understand things." "I know," he said. "What I observe," she said, "is worth saying aloud sometimes, instead of only in a notebook." "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she closed the notebook and stood up from the schoolhouse bench. "Come on," she said. "I told Agnes I'd help her put up the winter preserves this afternoon. She has more jars than she has hands." He stood. "You volunteered for that." "Agnes Calloway has been leaving firewood on her own porch for the past 3 winters," Evelyn said. "I thought it was time somebody did something for her in return." He looked at her. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said. "You were going to look at me like that, and it amounts to the same thing." He almost smiled. "Like what?" "Like I've confirmed something you were hoping was true," she said, and then walked out of the schoolhouse ahead of him. He stood there for 1 second longer than necessary, and then followed, which was, he thought, probably going to be the pattern for a significant portion of the rest of his life, and he found he had absolutely no objection to that. The afternoon at Agnes Calloway's was the kind of afternoon that had no drama in it whatsoever, and that Silas understood, even in the middle of it, was one of the afternoons he would remember for a long time. Evelyn and Agnes worked side by side in the kitchen, with the efficient rhythm of women who had separately done the same kind of work for years and found they shared a method, and they talked while they worked about the valley, about the children, about Pennsylvania and Ohio and the different kinds of winter each state produced. Silas did what was needed. He brought in wood. He repaired the cellar latch that had been sticking since September. He stacked the finished jars where Agnes pointed. At one point, Agnes said, without looking up from her work, "Jeb came to see me this morning." The room didn't exactly go quiet, but it shifted. "What did he?" Silas asked. "He said he was sorry," Agnes said. She paused. "He did not say it to either of you, which tells you something about the depth of his progress. But he came to me, and he said he had acted poorly, and that he knew it." Evelyn looked at Silas. Silas said, "He'll get there." "I know he will," Agnes said. "He has his father's worst qualities and his father's best ones in equal measure. The question is always which one he's going to reach for." She glanced up at Evelyn. "His father was a good man by the time he was 35. Only took him that long to figure out how. Some men need more years than others," Evelyn said. Agnes said, with the tone of a woman who had observed this phenomenon in enough men to have developed an entire philosophy about it. It was on the walk back to the boarding house, in the early dark of the October evening, that Silas said what he had been building toward for 3 days. Not planning building. The difference mattered. He wasn't strategic about it. He was just working up to it the way he worked up to any significant thing, by carrying it until the weight of not saying it was greater than the discomfort of saying it. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it the way you answer everything." "Honestly and at length," she said. "Honestly," he said. "The length is up to you." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "When you think about staying," he said. "When you actually think about it, practically, not in the abstract. The winter here, the distance from everything you knew. The life that looks nothing like the one you had. When you think about all of that," he paused. "Is it possible, actually possible? Or is it something that feels right in October and becomes something else by January?" She was quiet, not the sorting quiet or the processing quiet. The real quiet, the kind that meant she was going somewhere honest, that required some effort to reach. "I taught school for 4 years," she said, "in a town where everyone knew my name and my family and what was expected of me. I was competent, and I was respected, and she paused, very, very certain that the walls around me were the exact shape of walls. She looked at him. "I am not afraid of hard winters or hard work or distance. I am afraid of walls I can see so clearly, I've stopped questioning whether they're load-bearing." He looked at her. "The walls here are different," she said. "Some of them are bigger. Some of them are the mountains, which is not a small thing. But none of them have the particular feeling of," she searched for the word, "of a life that has been decided for you, instead of by you. And this," he said, "this," she said, "is the first thing in my adult life that I decided entirely by myself. Without my mother's opinion or the town's expectations or the measure of what a woman of my situation was supposed to want." She held his gaze. "I decided it was worth a train ticket to Pennsylvania and 32 letters and 1,500 miles, and I have not once, since arriving, thought I was wrong." The dark had come fully in around them. Somewhere down the street a lamp was lit in a window and threw its yellow square on the ground. "Evelyn," he said. "Yes, will you marry me?" She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. He counted. "You said we'd go carefully and without hurrying," she said. "Yes," he said, "I did. That was 4 days ago." "I know," he said. "I work fast when I know what I'm building." She stared at him. Then something moved through her expression, past the composure, past the precision, into something underneath that he recognized because he had seen it in her letters before he had ever seen her face. Something warm and specific and entirely her. "Ask me again in 2 days," she said. He looked at her. 2 days. "I want to spend 2 more days in this valley," she said. "Not because I don't know the answer. Because I want to be able to tell you the answer from here, rather than from the middle of a dark street, and I want to have thought about it in daylight first." "That's a very sensible approach to a marriage proposal," he said. "I'm a very sensible woman," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I asked. She turned back toward the boarding house. Then she stopped, turned around, and looked at him with the clearest expression he had seen from her yet. "Silas," she said, "yes. The answer is not going to change in 2 days." He held very still. "I just want the daylight," she said. He nodded once slowly. She went inside. He stood on the dark street of Cedar Hollow and looked up at a sky that was dense with stars. The kind of sky you only got this far from everything. The kind of sky that reminded you exactly how large the world was and how small your portion of it. And how unlikely it was, given all of that any particular thing happened at all. He thought about 32 letters. He thought about a woman stepping off a train in a town she had never seen, to meet a man who looked nothing like what she had imagined, and putting her bag down anyway. He thought about all the particular steps between that moment and this one, the south wall of the schoolhouse, and the coffee from Drummond's and the shelf on the ridge where his father was buried, and a notebook full of observations about a man who closed his left hand when he was listening. He thought about all of it. Then he went home to the ridge and slept, for the first time in 2 weeks, without any trouble at all. The next 2 days were ordinary in the way that days are ordinary. When you are carrying something that has not yet been said, but that both people know. They worked, they talked. She helped Mrs. Aldridge with the children 2 mornings in a row, and he noticed, watching from the doorway once, that she had a different register with them than she had with adults, still precise, still direct, but warmer in a way that was not performed. The children responded to her, the way children respond to adults who take them seriously. He did not say anything about it. He filed it. On the second evening, she came to find him at the livery. He was with Porter, which was where she expected him to be. She had learned his patterns the way she had learned the patterns of the valley, carefully, with attention, filing each thing where it belonged. 2 days, she said, from the doorway. He turned around. 2 days, he said. She stepped inside. She did not have the notebook. Yes, she said. He looked at her. You asked me something 2 days ago on the dark street, she said. The answer is yes. He had known it was coming. She had told him it was coming. And still, hearing it, he felt something move through him that he had no precedent for, something that started somewhere in his chest and went outward in every direction at once, not like an explosion but like water finding its level, settling into all the spaces that had been dry for a long time. Yes, he said, saying it back to her, because it needed to be said in his voice too. Yes, she confirmed, like a promise. Like the most precise and deliberate and completely certain thing she had ever said. He crossed the livery and stood in front of her, and she looked up at him with the same expression she had worn when she had put her hand on his arm at his father's grave, not performance, not decoration. Simply real, not her arm, her hand. She let him. They stood there in the livery in the cold and the dark and the smell of horses and hay, and Silas Wren, who had spent 17 years absolutely certain that the life he had chosen him back, and that the choosing was permanent and final, and not a matter for revision, understood for the first time that he had been wrong about that. That some things that look finished are only resting. That some doors you have convinced yourself were closed were simply waiting for someone to knock who knew how. Porter approves, he said, because the horse had turned around in the stall and was looking at them with the expression of an animal who had seen a great deal and considered most of it inevitable. Evelyn laughed, the full one, the real one, the one that surprised itself. Does his opinion matter? She asked. Out here, Silas said. Porter's opinion is the second most important one I consider. What's the first? Oh, she said. Yes, he said. She tightened her fingers around his. The next morning, Agnes Calloway cried when they told her. She had, by her own accounting, been expecting this since day 4, and she said so without a trace of apology. Mrs. Hale shook Silas's hand and told Evelyn that she had better judgment than she'd initially been given credit for, which Silas thought was a compliment in the particular shape of Cedar Hollow. Mrs. Aldridge said nothing at all for 30 seconds, and then said, "Good," in the tone of a woman who had wanted to say it for some time. Jeb Calloway found Silas at the livery that afternoon. He stood in the doorway, the same doorway where he had stood to deliver his warnings 2 weeks ago. And he looked at the floor and then at the wall, and then, with the effort of a man doing something that did not come easily to him, at Silas. "I heard," he said. "I figured you would," Silas said. A pause. "I was wrong," Jeb said, "about what I said. About what I told Harlow." He started again. He stopped again. "I thought if it didn't work out for you, it would mean something. That it would," he exhaled. "I don't know what I thought it would mean." "That it was right to give up before you start," Silas said. Jeb looked at him. "That's what you were looking for," Silas said. "Proof that trying doesn't work. Because then you don't have to try anything yourself." He said it without cruelty, because there was no cruelty in it. It was just the thing he had understood about Jeb from the beginning, and saying it plainly to a man who was standing in your livery trying to apologize seemed more respectful than softening it. He said finally, "Maybe." "The offer I made you 2 years ago still stands," Silas said. "When you're ready to come up the mountain and learn something about running trap lines that doesn't involve losing half your gear to the creek, you come find me." Jeb stared at him. "You're not," he stopped. "I'm not what?" "I told a man you were. I basically accused you of." "I know what you did," Silas said. "And you know you were wrong." "We've both said so. What comes next is up to you, not this conversation." Jeb stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he nodded. "Once." Silas turned back to Porter. "Don't," he said. Porter looked away. The next thing was the practical reality of two people who had said yes, and now had to figure what yes looked like in a town, with one preacher who visited on the third Sunday of every month and a boarding house that was only ever meant to be temporary. What it looked like, they decided together carefully, without hurrying, but with the particular efficiency of two people who had both spent enough time alone to understand that logistic retention was this. They would marry at the end of November on the wooden porch of Silas's cabin. They would spend the winter in the cabin. In spring, if Evelyn believed the valley needed it, they would build something larger. She would write to the school board in Cedar Hollow about a proper teaching arrangement. He would continue the work he had always done, the guiding, the trapping, the maintenance of the valley's various necessities. "It's not going to be easy," he told her. "I know," she said. "The winters up here are different from anything you." "Silas." "I know," she said again. With the weight of a woman who had read 32 letters and knew exactly where she was going and had chosen it anyway. He looked at her. "Tell me something I don't know," she said. "Something you haven't put in a letter yet." He thought about it. "The river," he said. "In January, when the temperature drops far enough, it doesn't freeze all at once. It freezes from the edges inward. And there's a morning, usually in the second or third week, when the last open channel in the middle finally goes. And for about 10 minutes, there's no sound at all. The whole valley goes quiet in a way that nothing else produces. Not silence like the absence of sound, silence like the presence of something." She was watching him. "I have waited for that morning every January for 17 years, he said. Alone. She reached out and took his left hand specifically, which told him she had been paying more attention to the notebook entry than she had let on. "Not anymore," she said. He closed his hand around hers. "Not anymore," he agreed. Outside, Cedar Hollow moved through its afternoon business, as it always had, and as it would continue to do, the dry goods store, and the livery, and the post office, and the schools, and the boarding house, with the clean curtains, all of it going on in the particular way of small places that have outlasted harder things than this. And in the livery, which smelled of hay and horses and honest work, a man who had spent most of his life believing he was not the kind of person love found held the hand of a woman who had come 1,500 miles to prove him wrong. He was not going to argue with evidence. She had told him that much. The third Sunday of November arrived with a cold that had teeth in it. Silas was up before 4, which was the same as always, except that this particular before 4 felt different from every other before 4 of the past 17 years. He sat at the table in the Ridge cabin with a lamp and a cup of coffee that he did not drink, and he looked at the room around him, The room he had built with his own hands. The room that had held only him for nearly 2 decades, and he tried to locate the feeling accurately. It was not nervousness. He had examined that possibility and set it aside. It was something larger and quieter than nervousness. It was the feeling of a man standing at the exact boundary between 2 portions of his life, aware that he is standing there, aware that the crossing is about to happen, and that once it does, the portion behind him will be permanently behind him. He found he was entirely at peace with that. He drank the coffee after all. Reverend Moss arrived at Cedar Hollow on the 3rd Sunday of every month, without exception, a habit so reliable that the town set its informal calendar by him. He was a lean, weathered man of 60, who had been traveling the circuit between 4 mountain settlements for 15 years, and who had the particular quality of clergymen who have spent too long in open country to be impressed by weather or drama or the complicated decisions of human beings. He had married 14 couples in Cedar Hollow and buried 23, and he did both with equal steadiness. Silas had ridden down to meet him the previous afternoon and explained the situation in the direct way he explained everything. Moss had listened without interruption. Then he had said, "The woman from Pennsylvania." "Yes," Silas said. "Mrs. Hale wrote to me," Moss said. Silas looked at him. "Mrs. Hale writes to me about everything significant that happens in Cedar Hollow," Moss said, without apparent guilt about this. "It's how I stay current. She told me 3 weeks ago that a schoolteacher from Pennsylvania had arrived to meet you, and that she was, quote, not what anyone expected, but possibly exactly what was needed." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Hale said that." "Mrs. Hale is an astute woman," Moss said. "Will tomorrow work? I need to be in Ridgeback by Monday evening." "Tomorrow works," Silas said. So it was settled in the particular way that Cedar Hollow settled things practically and without ceremony about the settling, saving the ceremony for the thing itself. The morning of the wedding, Evelyn came down to breakfast at Mrs. Hale's and found Agnes Calloway already there, with 3 other women, Martha Drummond, who was Hector's wife and a woman of considerable practical capability, Ruth Hendricks, whose 2 boys Silas tutored on Friday mornings, and Mrs. Aldridge, who arrived with a determination that suggested she had been planning this morning for at least a week, and had no intention of being unnecessary. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the dining room and looked at them. "I didn't ask," she started. "No," Agnes said. "You didn't." "Sit down." Sat down. Agnes set a plate in front of her. Martha poured coffee. Mrs. Aldridge produced from somewhere a length of deep blue ribbon that she held up against Evelyn's dark wool dress with the critical eye of a woman who had very specific opinions about color. "That," Mrs. Aldridge said with finality. "It's a porch wedding in November," Evelyn said. "I don't need, everybody needs something," Ruth Hendricks said, from the corner, in the tone of a woman who had delivered this opinion before and expected it to land. Evelyn looked at the 4 of them. Then she looked at her coffee. Then she looked up. "Thank you," she said, clearly. Without qualification, Agnes patted her hand once. "Eat," she said. "You can be grateful and have breakfast at the same time." Silas, at that same hour, was doing the thing he had been doing every morning. For 7 months he was writing. Not a letter. Something shorter. He had taken out a piece of paper and a pen, and he had written in the careful hand that Evelyn had told him she had recognized as particular from the first page of the first letter, a single paragraph. Not for her to read. For him to read once before the morning was over. The way he had burned the paper that said "I love her." Only this time he wasn't going to burn it. He was going to fold it and put it in his coat pocket and keep it there. He wrote, "You spent 17 years believing you were not the kind of man that love found. You were wrong. You were wrong in the most specific and irreversible way possible. Remember that. Remember it every time you are tempted to believe the smaller version of yourself." She came 1,500 miles. She put down her bag. She stayed. He folded the paper, put it in his pocket. Then he went to find his good coat, the one that actually fit, not the borrowed one from the first day, and he put it on, and he rode down to Cedar Hollow. The porch of the Ridge cabin was not large enough for the number of people who showed up. This was not something Silas had anticipated, and was very much something he should have. Cedar Hollow was not a large town. It was, however, a town that had watched its most solitary resident spend 17 years alone on a mountain. And the news that said resident was getting married on his own porch on the third Sunday in November had apparently constituted an event of the highest local significance. There were 31 people on and around that porch when Reverend Moss opened his Bible. Silas counted. He was aware that counting was a strange thing to be doing at his own wedding, and did it anyway. Evelyn came up the ridge path on Clover, riding straight-backed in the cold morning air, with Agnes on one side and Mrs. Aldridge on the other, and the blue ribbon threaded through her dark hair in a way that was simple and exact, and entirely her. She dismounted without help, because she always dismounted without help, and the day she was getting married was not the day she was going to change that, and she handed Clover's reins to young Tom Hendricks, who was 9 years old and had been practicing his reading with Silas for 3 weeks, and who took the reins with the seriousness of a person given an important responsibility. She walked up the porch steps. She stood beside Silas. She looked up at him with the same look she had given him in the livery 2 weeks ago, not the composed look, not the careful look, but the real one underneath. "You look nervous," she said, quietly, for him alone. "I told you it wasn't nervousness," he said. "What is it then?" "It's the feeling of standing at the border between one part of your life and another," he said. "And being completely willing to cross." She held his gaze for a moment. "Yes, exactly that." Reverend Moss cleared his throat. They turned to face him. What Moss said was the same thing he had said at 14 Cedar Hollow weddings, the words that had been said over human beings making promises to each other, for as long as there had been human beings and promises. Silas listened to every word as though it were the first time he had heard them, which, for all practical purposes, it was. He said the things he was asked to say, and he meant every syllable with the totality of a man who did not say things he did not mean. He felt the weight of Evelyn's hand in his when he took it, and he thought, somewhere under everything else, that her hand was smaller than his and fit there anyway, which was not a profound observation but was absolutely the one his mind chose. When it was done and Moss closed his Bible, and the assembled 31 people of Cedar Hollow made the sound that groups of people make when something they wanted to happen has happened, Evelyn looked up at him with the clearest eyes he had ever seen. "There," she said. "There," he agreed. He kissed her, which was something he had never done before, which was apparent, and which was nonetheless exactly right. Agnes cried. Ruth Hendricks cried. Mrs. Aldridge did not cry, but made a sound that was a very close neighbor to crying, and then covered it by announcing that there was food at the Drummond house, and everyone should go there immediately. Jeb Calloway, who had come and stood at the back of the assembled group, where nobody had specifically invited him, but nobody had specifically told him not to be, was very intently looking at a fixed point on the mountain and blinking more than the cold required. Silas saw it and said nothing and added it to the ledger he kept privately of Jeb's progress. They had the meal at the Drummonds, a long table's worth of food that had appeared from the collective resources of them in the way that food appeared in small communities when an occasion required it. Assembled without coordination, but with the particular efficiency of people who understood that occasion required feeding. Silas sat at the table in the middle of Cedar Hollow and ate food brought by people who had spent 15 years being afraid of him and 3 weeks watching him differently, and he thought about what Evelyn had said about walls. That the walls here were different, that none of them had the feeling of a life decided for you instead of by you. He looked at her across the table. She was deep in conversation with Mrs. Aldridge about reading methods, because Evelyn's wedding day was apparently not sufficient reason to stop thinking about the schoolhouse, which was one of the things he loved about her, and he understood that she was already doing what she had said she would do. She was making a life, not waiting for it to arrange itself. Making it. He was going to have to keep up. He found entirely unexpectedly that he was looking forward to the effort. The first twist of the afternoon came from a direction nobody anticipated, and it came from Hector Drummond, who waited until most of the meal was finished. and the conversation had settled into the comfortable murmur of a gathering that's its and was winding toward its close. Drummond stood up with a glass of something and looked around the table with the expression of a man who had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to say it. "I want to say something," Drummond said. The table went quiet. "I've known Silas Wren for 15 years, Drummond said. And in 15 years I have watched him fix more things in this valley than I can name, provide for more people than he'll admit to, and do more quiet good in the dark than most men manage in the light." He paused. "I have also watched him be the kind of lonely that you stop being able to see, because it's been there so long it looks like personality." Another pause, longer. "I am not a man who admits mistakes easily. But I will say, standing here, that I should have done more to know him better years, before this woman came and showed us all how." The table was very still. Drummond looked at Silas. "I'm glad she came," he said, "and I'm glad you asked." Silas looked at Drummond for a moment. "Hector," he said. "Yes? Sit down." Sat down. He was smiling. The table laughed, the real kind. The kind that comes from recognition rather than performance. Evelyn leaned slightly toward Silas. "Did you expect that?" she said quietly. "No," he said. "Are you all right?" He looked at her. "I think so," he said. "I think I'm going to need a minute." She nodded once and did not press, which was one of the things. He stepped outside briefly, into the cold of the afternoon, and stood in the side yard of the Drummond house and breathed. Not because he was overwhelmed in a bad way. Because he was overwhelmed in the way that happens when a thing you have lived with for so long you've accepted it as permanent suddenly lifts. And the lifting is disorienting even when it is entirely what you wanted. He had been lonely for so long that the absence of it felt like the sudden absence of a weight he'd forgotten he was carrying. You notice the weight most when it's gone. He heard the door behind him. He expected Evelyn. It was Jeb. Silas turned. Jeb was standing 2 feet away with his hands at his sides and his jaw set in the way it set when he was doing something that cost him. "I need to say something to you," Jeb said. "Not what I said in the livery. A different thing." "All right," Silas said. Jeb looked at the ground. Then at the mountain. Then with visible effort at Silas. "My sister Cora," he said. "You know she wants to go east." "I know," Silas said. "I've been telling her for 2 years that she'd regret it. That there's nothing there for her, that she should stay." He stopped. "I think," he stopped again, exhaled. "I think I was doing what you said I was doing. Using her to prove something to myself." He looked at Silas. "She should go if she wants to go. That's another stop." "That's her right." Silas was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "It is. I'm going to tell her," Jeb said, "when I go home tonight." "That's a hard thing to say," Silas said. "Harder than apologizing to me." "Yeah," Jeb said. "I know, it's the right thing." "Yeah," Jeb said again, a pause. "Then she'd want me to tell you congratulations." "Cora. She told me to say it. Tell her thank you," Silas said. Jeb nodded. "Turned to go. Stop the trap lines," he said, not turning around. "The offer you mentioned. Still open," Silas said. Jeb walked back inside. Silas stood in the cold for another 30 seconds. Then he went back into his wife. The word landed differently every time he thought it. Wife. He had spent so long unable to imagine the word applying to his life that he kept testing it, quietly, the way you test ice pressing down to see if it holds. It held every time. She was by the time he came back in, apparently in the middle of reorganizing Drummond's approach to his store inventory, which Drummond was accepting with the slightly dazed expression of a man who had agreed to a conversation about preserves and found himself in a logistics discussion. Silas sat down beside her and said nothing, and she finished the thought she was making, and then, without looking at him, put her hand briefly on his arm. He covered it with his. They stayed that way for a moment. Just that. The gathering wound down in the middle of the afternoon, and the 31 people of Cedar Hollow went back to their ordinary November Sunday, and Silas and Evelyn rode up to the ridge together as the light was going. The cabin was lit when they arrived. Agnes had come up earlier, Silas realized, and built a fire and left a lamp burning, because Agnes Calloway did not believe in leaving things to chance when she could do them herself. He found walking in that he was going to need to thank her properly, and that he was not sure how to do that in a way that matched the size of what she had done. Evelyn walked through the cabin slowly. He had shown it to her twice before, once in the second week and once in the week after, but this time she moved through it differently. Not assessing it, knowing it, she stopped at the table where the lamp was lit. She ran her hand along the edge of it, the table he had built, like everything else in the cabin. The wood worn smooth by years of use. "This is where you wrote," she said. "Yes, all of them, all 32, yes." She looked at the surface of the table in the lamplight. He watched her and did not fill the silence. "I want to write here too," she said. "If that's all right." "It's your table now," he said. She looked up at him. Something in her expression moved. "Our table," he agreed. She sat down. He went to put Porter up for the night, because horses did not suspend their requirements for significant occasions, and when he came back in from the cold, she had the notebook open and was writing. He stood in the doorway and looked at her at the table, in the lamplight, his table, their table, the table where 32 letters had been written into the dark, and at her back, straight and certain, the pen moving across the page. He took off his coat, put it on the hook by the door. Sat down across from her. She finished what she was writing and looked up. "What are you writing?" he asked. "A letter," she said. He looked at her. "To my mother," she said. She was not enthusiastic about my decision to come here. I wrote to her before I left and I have not written since." She looked at the page. "I want to tell her what I found. What are you going to say?" She considered it. "That I found a man who does what he says," she said. "That I found a valley that has been waiting for someone to look at it carefully. That I found," she paused, choosing the word room. "Room that I didn't know I needed. Is that enough?" he said. "For my mother," she said. "She will want details. She will write back with 17 questions, and at least 2 suggestions that I haven't asked for." She looked at him. "But the short version will do for the first letter." He nodded. "Then can I say something?" "Yes. Write to her," he said. "And tell her she's welcome here, if she ever wants to see it for herself." Evelyn looked at him. "You don't know my mother," she said. "No," he said. "But she raised you. I figure I owe her something on that account." She stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then she looked back down at the page and wrote something. He suspected it was that, or close to it. They sat at the table in the lamplight until late in the evening, she writing, he reading a book that he had genuinely meant to finish since February. And the cabin held them both the way it had held only him for 17 years, except that it held them differently. Warmer, fuller, like a space that has been waiting, without knowing it was waiting, for exactly the right amount of something. The first winter came hard. Silas had told her it would, and she had said she knew, and he had believed her. But there is a difference between knowing a thing intellectually and knowing it in the body in the cold that got into everything. In the mornings when the temperature was so low the hinges on the cabin door contracted and had to be forced. In the weeks in January, when the snow came in a way that was less weather and more condition. When the world simply was snow and everything else was detail. She did not flinch. He watched for it. Not because he doubted her, she had not given him reason to doubt her, but because he had spent 17 winters up here alone, and he was aware that each one had something particular in it. Some specific difficulty that he had met on his own, and he wanted to know how she met hers. The second week of January, a family 2 miles down the valley, the Moors, a young couple with twin girls of 4 lost their roof to a windstorm. Not completely. The other side did not, and they were in the storm with 2 children and half a roof in January. Silas heard about it at first light. He was already saddling Porter when Evelyn appeared in the cabin doorway fully dressed with the practical coat on. "I'm coming," she said. "The girls need," he started. "They need 2 people," she said, "not 1, and their mother is going to need someone to manage the children while their father and you fix the roof." He looked at her. "Porter can carry us both for 2 miles," she said. He moved his boot from the stirrup. They arrived at the Moore cabin to find exactly what she had predicted, staying in the wreckage of the fallen roof section with the expression of a man trying not to panic and Sarah Moore inside with two 4-year-old girls who were frightened and cold and not understanding why their house was broken. Evelyn went through the door to Sarah, and the girls and Silas went to Tom, and they each went to the thing that needed doing without discussion, because they had been living with each other long enough to know, without talking about it, where each of them was most useful. The roof section took 4 hours. Tom Moore was a capable man who had built the cabin himself and knew what he was doing. What he lacked was height and leverage, both of which Silas provided. And by midday, the structural damage was contained, and the gap covered with timber that would hold through the winter. Not perfect, not what the roof had been, good enough for February. Inside, when they came in cold and worked, Sarah Moore had food on the table, and the twin girls were sitting with Evelyn on the floor near the fireplace. One of them was asleep against Evelyn's arm. The other was listening to something Evelyn was telling her in a low voice, with the focused expression of a child who was following a story carefully. Tom Moore looked at the scene in his cabin, and something in his face did what faces did when something they needed was present. "Thank you," he said, not to Silas specifically, to both of them. "That's what neighbors are for," Evelyn said with complete simplicity. The sleeping girl shifted. Evelyn adjusted without breaking the story for the waking one. Silas looked at her from across the room and felt the particular thing he felt when he saw her do something that revealed another layer, something he had known was there, had read in the letters, had seen in flashes, but which kept presenting itself in new forms that were somehow still recognizable as entirely her. He looked away before she could see him looking. He was not entirely successful. She met his eyes briefly, and the corner of her mouth moved. He was keeping count of those, too. He was aware this was going to be a project of decades, and he found he had no objection to that. The twist that January produced the real one, the large one, the kind that knocked the air sideways, came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the Moore roof, and it came in the form of a letter. Not from Evelyn's mother, though that letter had come, had been 17 questions and 2 suggestions exactly as predicted, and had been answered with patience and a detail about the valley that Silas had told her specifically to include because he knew it would make the place real to a woman who hadn't seen it. This letter came from a town called Dermont, 40 miles north, and it was addressed to Silas in handwriting he did not immediately recognize and then did. He stood in the Drummond store with the letter in his hand and recognized the handwriting and stood very still for a moment. Then he opened it. It was from his brother, Daniel Wren, who had not answered 2 letters in the early years, who Silas had eventually placed in the category of things he had no control over, and therefore stopped expecting anything from, had written. The letter was 6 paragraphs. Silas read it standing at the counter in Drummond's store, with the cold coming in every time someone opened the door, and Drummond wisely not saying anything. Daniel had received both early letters. He had not answered the first one because he had been ashamed he had made decisions in those years that he was not proud of, and the thought of accounting for them to a brother he had left behind was more than he could face. He had not answered the second one for the same reason. He had moved 3 times since then. He had a wife. He had 2 sons, 14 and 11. He had heard, through a particular chain of frontier information that Silas could not entirely trace from the letter, that his brother had married a woman from Pennsylvania and was living on the same mountain in Colorado where he had always lived. He had wanted to write, the letter said, for a long time. He was writing now because his older son had asked him, recently, why he never talked about his family, and he had not had an answer that he was willing to give a 14-year-old boy. He wanted to know if it was too late. Silas folded the letter. He stood at the counter for another minute. Then he said, "Hector, can I borrow paper and a pen?" Drummond produced both without a word. Silas sat at the small writing desk, in the corner of the store, the one Drummond kept for customers who needed to fill out orders, and he wrote back to his brother in the same way he wrote everything. Directly, without decoration, and with complete honesty. He wrote, "It is not too late. It was never going to be too late. Come when you're ready. There is room here. There is always room here." He sealed it and gave it to Drummond to go out on the next mail. Then he rode home and told Evelyn. She listened without interrupting, the same quality of listening she brought to everything that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" she said. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "I've been deciding for a long time that it was resolved. That he was in the past tense category, and the account was closed." He paused. "Turns out I was wrong about that too." "You've been wrong about several permanent things recently," she said. Not unkindly, with the precision of a woman noting an accurate pattern. "I'm revising my understanding of what permanent means," he said. She looked at him. "What did you write back?" he told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Good," she said. "Simple as that. Good," in the voice that meant she had assessed the thing fully and found it right. He turned his hand over and held hers. "He has 2 sons," he said. 14 and 11. "You told me." He paused. "I was thinking about what that means. That there are boys who have been growing up not knowing they have an uncle." She looked at him steadily. "They know now," she said. "They know now," he agreed. The January silence came on a Thursday morning in the 3rd week. Silas was already awake. He was always already awake, and he heard it coming the way he always heard it coming. A gradual lowering of the river's voice, then a lesser and lesser sound, and then nothing. The particular nothing that was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something. He got up without waking Evelyn. He pulled on his coat and his boots and went out to stand on the porch of the cabin he had built with his hands, and he listened to the silence of January in the valley, the silence he had waited for every winter for 17 years. He heard the door behind him. Evelyn came out in her coat and her boots, having apparently decided that sleeping through this was not something she intended to do, and stood beside him on the porch. She had heard him describe it. He had described it in one of the letters, and again the night in the livery, when they had held hands for the first time, and she had remembered. Because she remembered everything he told her, with that particular focused attention that was simply the way her mind worked. She had gotten up to hear it with him. They stood on the porch together in the cold, and they listened. It was exactly what he had said it was, not the absence of sound. The presence of something that words had always been insufficient for. The whole valley gathered into itself for those minutes, and the only sound was their own breathing and the particular silence of a mountain that had gone as quiet as it was capable of being. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. After about 8 minutes, she took his hand. He closed his around hers. They stood like that until the first sound returned, a creak from somewhere down the frozen river, a bird, the valley beginning to breathe again. "Yes," she said quietly, not to him specifically. To the thing they had just experienced. "Yes," he said. She looked up at him. "Every year," she said. "Every year," he said. She turned back inside, and he followed her, and they closed the door behind them against the cold. Spring came the way it always came in the Rockies, reluctantly, and then all at once, as though the mountain had been holding its breath for 5 months, and finally let it go. The river unfroze from the center outward. The aspens came back. The elk calves appeared on the north ridge. The world that had been white and iron for months became very suddenly a different world entirely. Evelyn had spent the winter the way she spent everything, fully and with purpose. She had worked with Mrs. Aldridge 3 days a week and taken over the Thursday sessions herself, which had resulted in a significant improvement in the reading levels of the younger children, which Mrs. Aldridge reported to anyone who would listen with the satisfaction of someone whose faith has been confirmed. She had finished writing to her mother and begun receiving letters back that had, with each exchange, become slightly less full of questions and slightly more full of something that was adjacent to acceptance, if not quite there yet. She had learned, over the course of 5 months, every family in the valley by name, which families needed watching, and which ones needed space, where the practical problems were, and which of them she could do something about. She had become, without making a project of it, part of the place. Silas watched this happen with the particular feeling of a man watching something he had hoped for, but not allowed himself to expect, arriving. On the first real spring morning, the kind where the air had changed, and you could feel it in the way the cold was different, softer. Not gone, but becoming something else. Evelyn came out onto the porch with her coffee and her notebook and stood looking at the valley. He came out beside her. "Your brother wrote," she said. He looked at her. "This morning. Drummond sent Tom Hendricks up with the mail." She held out the letter. "I didn't open it. He took it. Opened it. Daniel was coming." Not immediately. He had arrangements to make, a farm to sort out, a wife to convince. Which he said with a humor that Silas recognized as the particular kind of humor that had been in his brother's voice when they were young, and which he was startled to find still recognizable after 30 years. He was thinking July. He wanted to bring his sons. He said he had told his older boy about his uncle. He said the boy had listened carefully and then asked one question. He said the question was, "What's he like?" Daniel had written, "I told him you were the kind of man who fixed things." Silas read that sentence twice. He folded the letter. "Well," Evelyn said. "July," he said. "He's bringing his family in July." She looked at him. "What do you need?" He looked at the valley. He thought about the cabin, one room, essentially, with the sleeping loft and the main space, and the table where they both wrote now, her side and his side. The notebook and the letters, and whatever he was currently reading, left open against each other in the middle. "I think," he said, "we might need to build something larger." She had been waiting for this. He could see from her expression that she had been waiting for exactly this conversation, and had probably been waiting since October. She opened the notebook. "I've been thinking about the east wall," she said. "If you extend it 20 feet and put in a proper second room." "You drew plans," he said. "Preliminary thoughts," she said. He looked at the notebook. She had, with the particular precision she brought to everything, sketched out a floor plan that was significantly better than anything he would have come up with on his own. "You've been doing this all winter," he said. "I've been thinking about it," she said. "There's a difference. Evelyn, yes, you've been doing this all winter." She looked at him directly. "You said there was room," she said. "I wanted to make sure there would be." He took the notebook, looked at the plan, turned it once. "The east wall is load-bearing," he said. "You can't extend without a proper lintel." "I know," she said. "I accounted for it. Look at the line there." He looked. She had. He closed the notebook and gave it back to her. "All right," he said. She took the notebook with the composure of a woman who had been confident about this, but was still glad to have it confirmed. "We'll start in April," he said. "Grounds workable by mid-month." "I thought May was more realistic," she said. "April," he said. "I work fast when I know what I'm building." She looked at him. He had said those words before. She remembered. She always remembered. "All right," she said. "April." They built in April. He did the structural work and she directed the interior, and they argued about 3 things, which was by now a completely normal proportion of their communication, and one that both of them found neither too much nor too little. The Hendricks boys came and helped on 2 Saturdays, which Tom Moore's older girl said was unfair, and which resulted in her joining them on the 3rd Saturday, with her mother's entirely unsurprised permission. By June, the cabin had a second room and a proper window on the east wall and a table large enough for company. Daniel Wren arrived on a Thursday afternoon in July with his wife Martha, small and sharp-eyed and clearly the person who had organized the entire trip and everyone in it, and his sons, William, who was 15 by then, and Solomon, who was 12. They came up the mountain road in a wagon that was better than Silas expected and worse than the road required, and they pulled up in front of the cabin in the early afternoon. Silas stood on the porch. He had not seen his brother in 30 years. Daniel was shorter than him, most people were, and had gone gray at the temples, and had the look of a man who had worked outside for most of his life. He climbed down from the wagon and stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at Silas. 30 years. "You got bigger," Daniel said. "You got older," Silas said. A pause. Then Daniel walked up the steps and Silas put his hand out, and Daniel ignored it and put his arms around him instead, which was not something either of them had probably planned, and which was entirely right. They stood like that for a moment. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, low, into his shoulder. "I should have answered the letters." "Yes," Silas said. "You should have. I'm answering now." "Yes," Silas said. "You are." They stepped back. Evelyn came out of the cabin with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of the woman who had organized the deal to make sure this moment happened comfortably and who was now going to be entirely in the background of it, which was exactly what was needed. William, 15 and watchful, was looking at his uncle with the expression of a young man who had been told something and was now testing it against reality. He looked at the cabin, he looked at the valley, he looked at Silas. "You built all of this?" William said. "Most of it," Silas said. "Some of the recent work was a collaboration." He looked at Evelyn. William looked at her too. "Are you the one who came from Pennsylvania?" "I am," Evelyn said. "My father said you came a long way to get here." "I did," she said. William thought about this. "Was it worth it?" Evelyn looked at Silas. He looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Every mile." William seemed to accept this. He turned back to the valley with the particular look of a 15-year-old who has decided something is real and is now making room for it. Solomon, 12, had gone immediately to Porter's fence and was offering the horse his palm with the seriousness of a boy who had learned proper horse manners from someone and knew it. Silas watched him. "He's good with horses," Daniel said, coming to stand beside Silas. "Gets it from somewhere," Silas said. Daniel looked at him sideways. Silas said. "Yeah," Daniel said quietly. "Yeah, he was." Martha, meanwhile, had already found Evelyn, and they were already in conversation that Silas could not hear, and that involved the notebook and several gestures toward the east wall of the cabin and what appeared to be a significant exchange of opinion. He looked at this and felt the particular feeling of someone watching 2 people recognize each other as belonging to the same general category of person. It was going to be, he understood, a very energetic few days. He did not mind that. He stood on the porch of his cabin in July in Colorado, with his brother beside him, and his brother's sons below him, and his wife already deep in conversation with his sister-in-law about something he was going to have an opinion about, before the week was out. And he looked at the valley that had been his for 17 years. It was still his, that hadn't changed, but the word his had changed. It had gotten larger. It now contained all of this, the people on the porch, the plans in the notebook, the letters that would keep coming, the boy at the fence and the horse who turned to look at him with magnificent indifference. The January morning on the porch, and every January morning that was coming, the schoolhouse with the south wall repaired, and the north wall waiting for spring. The firewood stacked on Agnes Calloway's porch, and the table where 2 people wrote now instead of 1. He thought about the platform in Cedar Hollow. He thought about a woman with a bag in her hand and 1 foot on the train step and the particular broken quality of the voice that had stopped her. He thought about what that moment had cost him to produce 17 years of silence, stored up and poured into 8 words. He thought about what those 8 words had started. Everything standing on this porch, everything in this valley. Every single thing. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the folded paper he had put there the morning of his wedding and had kept there every day since. He did not take it out. He knew what it said. She came to stand beside him. She had her coffee and her notebook, and she leaned against the porch rail and looked at the valley with him. "What are you thinking?" she said. He looked at her. The woman who had read 32 letters and traveled 1,500 miles and put down her bag. The woman who had notebooks full of observations and plans for east walls and letters to her mother that were getting gradually warmer. The woman who had gotten up in the cold dark of January to stand on a porch and listen to a river go quiet. "I'm thinking," he said, "that I was wrong about most of the things I believed for the first half of my life." She looked at him steadily. "Which things? That solitude was the same as peace," he said. That a man with scars was not worth choosing, that the letters had been foolish. He paused. That the door was closed. She held his gaze. "It was never closed," she said. "No," he said. "It was never closed. I just didn't know how to knock." She put her hand on his arm, the way she had done on the ridge at his father's grave. Simple and specific and completely real. You didn't knock, she said. You wrote 32 letters instead. Did that work? He said. She looked at him with the full, clear, unflinching attention of a woman who had crossed a continent on the strength of those words and found every single one of them true. It worked, she said. The valley held them. The mountain stood behind them. Daniel said something to his son, and the boy laughed a young, bright sound that the ridge had never heard before. Martha said something to nobody in particular, and Evelyn answered without looking away from the valley, because she was always tracking 3 things at once and always had been. The old train still passed through Cedar Hollow every Tuesday and Friday morning. The platform where a man had once stood in a coat that didn't fit and asked a woman not to leave was still there, worn smooth now by years of boots and weather, the same wooden planks, the same distance between the station and the mountains. But the man who had stood on it was not the same man. And the woman who had put down her bag was not passing through anymore. She was home, and that was not a small thing. That was not a quiet thing. That was the entire thing, the sum of 32 letters and 1,500 miles and one broken voice on a cold autumn platform, and the particular courage it took for 2 people to believe, against all the evidence of their separate lives, that they were not the kind of story that ended before it began. They were not. They never had been. They had only needed someone to say so out loud.